Hi dear, what if I told you that you can get more exclusive and more exciting content? You can become a hokage in a hidden village of lonely kunoichi. For that, you just need to go to my boosty. The link will be in the description.
Naruto turned from the left, Sakura you go from the right, I'll be ahead of you. The white-haired ninja said, jumping on the high trees of Hyro Forest. Gray Forest. Hi. Yes, the two younger nins said, immediately obeying their leader. The pink-haired girl jumped out of the trees and ran deeper into the forest, while blonde boy turned left and continued jumping through the trees. His blue eyes quickly scanned the area for his target, but he saw no one. There's no one here, I'm going to go near the cliff. I can't see that area from here, he said into the mic of the wireless radio. Okay, but be careful. His teacher's voice came out. Hi, he answered simply, closing off his end of the transmission. He stopped at the end of the tree ring. He quickly searched the area. I can't find anyone here, I guess. He talked into the radio. But his sentence was cut short at the sight of a gruff-looking man. The gruff-looking man. Sakura, Kakashi Sensei, I think I foe. This time his sentence was cut short when the man suddenly charged at him and punched him in the gut. Naruto. What happened? Naruto. He heard his friend frantically yell into the radio. He tried to answer her, but the man flipped in the air and kicked him the head. Naruto crashed into many branches as he fell to the ground. He tried to slow down his fall so he wouldn't end up splattered on the floor. He succeeded, but still he received a pretty painful fall. The man jumped down after him, his heel preceding him, searching for a place to land on the blonde's somewhat broad chest. Naruto opened his eyes wearily to see that. He quickly flipped to the side, letting the man's foot sink into the hard ground. The man turned to him and glared. Kagebunshin no Jutsu. Shadow Clone Jutsu, Naruto yelled. 2 clones appeared on each side. The 2 charged at the older man, trying to punch him. But the man quickly avoided the 2 clones' attacks, then stabbed them with a long kunai. 2 more clones appeared and charged at the man, who by that time had successfully removed his foot of the grabby ground. He ducked to avoid a punch by the first clone, then jumped to evade a kick from the other. The man then grabbed one of the clones from the collar, and threw him onto the other clone. The 2 clones flew back, and then disappeared into a cloud of smoke upon hitting a tree. But just as the man turned around, he found 3 of the blonde's clones attacking him. They went through an intense taijutsu battle, 3-1. But in the end, the man turned out to be an expert in taijutsu, unfortunately for Naruto. Naruto. He heard the girl's reassuring voice call as she raced to his aid. Ah, Sakura-chan. CHA. The pinkett yelled, pumping more chakra into her fist. Her fist made contact with the man's face. And with her great speed and enormous power, she sent him flying back, way back. He crashed straight through 5 large tree barks in a row, then finally settled in the 6th. Arigato, Sakura-chan. Thanks, Naruto yelled excitedly. Ah, yeah, my pleasure. She smiled back. Meanwhile, the man surprisingly did not die. He pushed himself out of the tree and nearly fell to his knees. He knew it would be a foolish thing to stay. He didn't have a prayer against the clone-using kid and freak of nature girl. He instantly started fleeing. He's getting away. Sakura yelled, interrupting Naruto's rambling. Well, we won't let that happen, Naruto said, running after the guy. The man led the 2 teens back to the edge of the forest. His speed had noticeably increased. Sakura quickly pumped chakra into her feet in order to catch up to the man. But for some reason, Naruto was unable to keep up with their speed. Suddenly Kakashi appeared in the way of the man. The latter got confused and did not know what to do as the pink-haired girl started to catch up, and continuing forward was not an option. Good job, Naruto yelled excitedly, abruptly stopping on a tree branch. A smirk of content flashed on the man's face. He lifted 2 fingers in front of his face, focusing chakra. Kakashi immediately understood what was happening. Be careful, you two. He's gonna. His sentence was cut short when a series of explosions spread throughout the forest. One of the pressure waves pushed Sakura off the branch. It caught her off guard, so she didn't get a chance to get a grip. She gasped as she found that she was falling towards the nothingness beyond the cliff. Sakura. Both Kakashi and Naruto yelled, jumping towards her. Kakashi was the closest to her. He caught her in mid-air, then pulled her back to the tree branch. Naruto smiled as he saw Kakashi pull Sakura to safety. Thank goodness, he breathed. But suddenly, a second series of explosions accrued. The pressure waves quickly reached the 3 of them, Kakashi held Sakura tightly as he steadied himself on the tree with chakra grip. But Naruto was in mid-air when the pressure waves reached him. They pushed him about 3 meters front when he suddenly realized he was in mid-air, with nothing under him, and he was falling, and there was nothing for him to do. By the time the explosion after effects were over, Naruto had already been pushed far away from the edge, and already started to fall. Naruto! Sakura screamed, trying to jump after him. But Kakashi held on to her tight. It's no use, Sakura, he told her. Naruto! She screamed again, reaching down, but she knew Kakashi was right, it's no use. Kakashi turned away to see their target fleeing. He hated these situations, he hated them so. I see, Tsunade said slowly, her eyes to the ground. So that's what happened. Ah. The masked ninja answered, a pained look in his eye. The pink-haired teen remained silent, tears locked in her eyes, as did the black-haired woman in the kimono. Well? Tsunade started, swallowing with great difficulty. Silence took over the room once more. Everyone was lost in their own world of thoughts. But the main theme for all of them was Naruto. Konoha became a very quiet place. The mountains no longer ringed with the voice of the loud-mouthed blonde. It was a very big loss to Konoha that wasn't going to be forgotten very easily. Many search expeditions were sent to look for Naruto, or at least his body. But none were successful either way. Even the Byakugan was no help. Eventually everyone surrendered to fate's choice, and reluctantly continued with their lives. Oheu Shikamaru. Good morning, a low voice said from behind. He turned around slowly to see his best friend approaching him slowly. Oheu. Chuji. He mumbled, unenthusiastically. The two stood together, silently gazing in different directions. Oi, Shikamaru? Chuji began. The lazy genius turned to him silently and signaled that he was listening. Do you miss Naruto? He asked, sort of shy. Shikamaru sighed, and leaned his head on the wall as he watched the clouds for a few moments. Yeah. He finally answered. How is Sakura-chan doing? Chuji asked his friend. Shikamaru sighed again. According to Ino, not very well. He answered, still gazing at the sky. Chuji hummed something in response. There was a brief moment of silence. Ne, Shikamaru? Chuji hesitated. Ne is equivalent to say, I think. Shikamaru turned to him with a questioning look on his face. Do you think Naruto is still alive? He asked. Shikamaru sighed for the third time. He turned back to the clouds. He tried to imagine Naruto's giddy face in them. He got an image of a half-fox, half-boy funny face, slurping a big bowl of miso ramen. He smiled calmly and closed his eyes. It was always her. It was always her who hurt the most. Whenever she gave her heart to someone, she ended up losing it. Knock, knock, knock. Sakura Ino's here. She wants to talk to you. Knock, knock, knock. Sakura didn't answer her mother. She buried her face in her fluffy pillow. Knock, knock. Sakura, it's me, Ino. Please unlock the door and let me in. Sakura. Sakura ignored the voices outside the door. She lifted her pillow and put it over her head just in case. Knock, knock. Sakura, are you in there? Sakura, can you hear me? Please don't ignore me like this. Bang, bang. Damn it, Sakura, open this door right now. Open this door now or I'll smash it. Sakura didn't answer, and she flipped over and gazed at the ceiling blankly. Bang, bang, sigh. Look, Sakura. I really want to help you. I know you're hurting, but I can't help you unless you let me in. Ino's voice came through the door, now in a gentle voice. Nevertheless, Sakura continued ignoring the world, insisting on her solitude. Tap, tap. Sakura, can you hear me? Sigh, sorry Hirono-chan, I've got to go home now, but I'll come back again later. Ino said to Sakura's mother. It's alright, Ino. Have a safe walk home. See you later, Sakura. Ino said gently but got no response. Sakura continued staring at the ceiling blankly. Ino doesn't understand anything. She still has Shikamaru and Chuji. Nothing like this happened to her. She doesn't understand. A tear trickled down her cheek and onto her pillow. She put her hands on her heart and squeezed her eyes shut as she flipped onto her side. Naruto. Sayuri is a normal girl. Sayuri is a normal girl that lives alone. Sayuri is a normal girl that lives alone with her dog in the forest. Sayuri goes every morning to fill some water from the creek, that gets its supply of water from the river. And that's what she did that other day. Come on, Bobo, don't fall behind. Sayuri called, skipping towards the creek. The large dog barked back at her, then ran over. She slowly walked to the creek, humming to herself contentedly. Not a problem in the world could reach her this deep into the forest. Nearly nobody ever entered this uninhabited area, other than her. She smiled at her dog as he joyfully played in the cool water. She filled the jug with tea. He fresh water. Then when she was finished, "Come on, Bobo, I'm finished, let's go." But Bobo didn't come. "Bobo? Where are you?" she called, stepping in the water, careful not to slip and fall. "Bobo?" She heard her dog bark at a distance. "Bobo! Where'd you go, you silly thing?" she said in a childish voice, pretending to be angry. Her large paw popped out from behind a big boulder. He had something that looked like a sandal in his mouth. "Where'd you find that?" She crossed her brows as she cautiously stepped towards her dog. She finally reached her dog. She pulled the sandal from his mouth. "Bobo! Why?" She stopped when she saw someone tangled in some weeds and twigs. "Ooh," she whispered, cautiously turning around the boulder. She stared at the person. He had blonde hair, his clothes were tattered, and he had a big gash on his forehead. She instantly started pulling at him. Bobo helped. She barely managed, but with the help of her dog, she dragged the boy out of the water. She laid him on his back and looked at his face. She hesitated, then leaned closer. She put her ear to his heart. It was still beating. She sat up and sighed. She felt relieved. She didn't know what she would have done if he had been dead, especially since she doesn't know CPR. She stood up and crossed her arms and brows. Now how is she going to get him all the way back to her cabin? She could just leave him here to be found. But she knew that was highly unlikely. No one comes to this area. If she left him here, he'd probably die, and that wouldn't be a very nice thing to do. She collected some giant leaves and some sticks and twigs, and haphazardly weaved them together. She rolled the boy's body onto it, and started dragging it. It was a very long way home, and the rough road wasn't making her job any easier. "I'll leave it to your imagination." Nevertheless, she continued, she really wanted to help this stranger. Sayuri finally made it back to the cabin. The boy was a bit bloody and bruised from the rough handling, and because she had dropped him a few times. She stopped in front of her front porch and sighed. She wiped a sweat drop from her forehead with the back of her hand, then leaned back over the boy. She grabbed him from behind, and dragged him with her arms under his. She felt every step under her guest. Finally, the very short set of stairs were over. She dragged the blonde into a side guest room. She laid him down gently, then went to get a mattress. As she quickly set up a sleeping place, she wondered to herself why she even had a guest room. It's not like she ever had any guests. She shrugged as she laid the boy on the blanket and covered him. Probably for situations like this. For the next week, Sayuri tended to the weird guest. She would feed him, wipe his face, and so on. He would have nightmares, or what seemed like them to her. His eyes would race under their lids, and his lips would move with incomprehensible words, but eventually he'd settle. She followed her usual routine that day. She had just came back after filling some fresh water. "Bobo, you coming in?" she called, pulling the large jug in the door. But Bobo didn't bark back. "Bobo?" She turned around and looked into the yard. Bobo was nowhere to be seen. She heard some noises coming from inside the cabin. "Bobo? When did you get inside?" She followed the noises. It led her to the guest room. "Bobo, what did I tell you about?" She froze. "Oh my. Her blonde guest was sitting up, staring at the world with blank eyes. "Hey, when did you?" It's nice to see you awake." He turned to her. "Who are you? Where am I?" he asked. "Oh, my name is Sayuri. You're in my cabin in the forest," she answered with a smile. "How did I get here?" he asked, looking at his surroundings. "I brought you here. I found you in the creek injured. It's east from here," she answered, sitting on her knees next to him. "Can I get you something?" she asked politely. He turned to her, confused for a moment. "Huh? Oh no, thanks." He continued studying the room, raking his brain. "Do you remember what happened to you? How you got in the creek?" she asked, fiddling with her fingers. He shook his head. "Well then, what's your name?" she added. He turned to her and gave her a puzzled stare. "My name?" he whispered thoughtfully. He's supposed to know his name, his age, his home, where he came from, his family, and his friends, but all those details were lost. He turned back to the girl. She was still waiting for an answer. I can't remember. A /N. Yeah, I don't like where I stopped either, but oh well. Hope you had fun. I won't keep you waiting too long for the next chapter. One hope. Reviews are a must, so you must review. Criticism is welcome. Questions are answered, so ask if you have one. /N2. If anyone is interested in checking out the drawing I drew of Yumi, the OC of Eye of the Wolf, check it out on DeviantArt. Link will be on my profile page. This was all you found? Tsunade asked, disappointed, looking at the black head protector. Ah, but from the smell it's definitely Naruto's. Kiba answered, looking down. Akamaru whimpered. Tsunade turned to Hinata, hoping for some hope, but the white-eyed girl just looked down and shook her head. Tsunade sighed as she sat back down. Where are you? Naruto? How about Pac-Pun? Sayuri suggested in her childish voice. The blonde guest was now dressed in a clean white top and vest, and long black pants and new black sandals. But Sayuri-chan, you don't like it? Well, you've turned down all my suggestions, she said, lifting her arms. That's because they're all pet names, the blonde said, scratching his temple with a slight smile. Then he sighed. Oh, you're right, She started pacing in thought. I got it, she suddenly said, snapping her fingers. The blonde braced himself for another pet name. He forced out a pale smile. After all, she is his savior. How about if we call you K? K? Yeah, it means lucky, and that's what you are, you're lucky. The blonde thought it over. It wasn't that bad, it had a nice ring to it, K. He nodded with a grin on his face, so she smiled back. So it's settled, you are K-san, Kiai-san. She said the name twice as if she was trying to get used to it herself. K-san, she said contently. He smiled. He actually likes her childish traits. K-san. It's been 2 weeks now since K woke up. His fit body and strong muscles were of great help to Sayuri. She could get water much easier than before since he could carry them much easier. He was also a natural climber, and as much as Sayuri would like to brag about being the best climber, she no longer could when K would outclimb her. Now she can get the fruit from the very high forest trees thanks to him. He would also go with her to the village from time to time, when it was really necessary. She hated leaving her cabin, her forest, her home. But now that K was with her, all the weird looks that people would give her didn't hurt so much anymore, since K was there. Sayuri got really attached to K. She could no longer live without him, and although they were probably the same age, she looked up to him like an older brother, and from time to time she would call him an I-san. The same goes for K. He had no one else in the world for him. Sayuri-chan was the person who cared and watched out for him when he most needed it. Where was his real family? Where's his friends? Are they even looking for him? He no longer cared. He now had a little sister who loved him. It still pained him that he couldn't remember anything about his past, but when he looked at Sayuri's kind smile, it didn't matter anymore. He was a new person with a new life. At Sakura's window. Tap tap. Tap tap. Sakura. Kakashi-sensei? Sakura mumbled, surprised, rolling out of her bed. She quickly whipped away a tear before opening the window. Kakashi was sitting on the ledge. Kakashi-sensei? Nan. Sakura started, then preferred not to ask such an obvious question. He was there to talk to her. She was about to say Nanny equals what are you doing here? I'm here to talk to you, he said calmly as if he could hear what she's thinking. She plopped down onto her bed. There's nothing to talk about, she murmured, gazing at the floor. I heard you locked yourself in here, and you're refusing to come out or talk to anyone, Kakashi said, keeping a steady stare on her face. Everything is going to be alright. I'll make sure everything is going to be just like before, trust me. But how could she? He said the same thing to her before, and soon after that Sasuke left and never came back. How can she believe everything is going to be alright, when nothing is ever alright with her? Sakura looked up at him with tears in her eyes. Think about Naruto, and how he would feel, Kakashi said to her. Huh? She looked up at him, stunned. Think about how much he loved life. Do you think he would want you to give up like this? Sakura pictured Naruto's forever determined face, and heard his voice ring in her heart. Never, it said. But Sakura shook her head. Naruto is dead, she yelled at Kakashi. Nevertheless, Kakashi shook his head. How do you know that? She mumbled. Kakashi looked at the sky. Don't you? Becoming Hokage is my dream, and I'm not going to die until then. Naruto's voice echoed in her head and heart. You're right, Sakura whispered. Come on, Kakashi said, standing up. To where? She asked, surprised, standing up as well. Hokage-sama gave us a mission to search for Naruto. Kei-san. Kei-san. Where are you? Sayuri called, searching her home. Yeah? Kei said, popping out of nowhere. Sayuri jumped. Kei-san, stop doing that, you scared me. Netabeo, Sayuri grunted. Just a childish grunt similar to no, I'm not sure if any could be used before the rest of the word as it's not part of it, but shrug. For some reason that last word clicked differently in his subconscious. Kei-san? Sayuri muttered when he froze for a second. It's nothing. What did you need me for? Kei said with a smile. Oh yeah? I need you to help me with hanging the laundry. Okay, that's a lie, I want you to help me with the laundry. Kei shrugged, going to pick up the large hamper full of clothes. I don't think I can do this, Sakura suddenly said, her breathing quickening. It's okay, Sakura. You can do this, Kakashi assured her. Sakura took a deep breath. Maybe if they retrace his steps they can find him. But what if he's dead? I don't think I can handle seeing him dead. She turned to Kakashi, continuing through the trees. Don't worry, he isn't dead, Kakashi said in a firm voice. Sakura. Up ahead there's a village, maybe we can ask around. Sakura gulped. This may be their last hope in finding Naruto. They walked through the semi-crowded streets of the small secluded village, asking everyone they could find. Excuse me, miss, did you see this boy? Kakashi asked, lifting a picture of Naruto that was pulled out of his ninja file. Huh? What? Leave me alone, I'm too busy to talk now. She pushed past him. Aji-san, have you seen this person anywhere? Sakura asked, sticking a picture of Naruto under a man's nose. No, sorry, can't say I did, he said, walking away. Sima-mason, excuse me, did you by any chance see this boy? You know. Can you please help me? Do you know this boy? Well, we shouldn't just sit around, let's finish searching, Sakura said, getting up from where she had just sat. Kakashi did the same, feeling impressed at Sakura's determination. She walked up to some young children who were playing ball. She flashed them a warm smile. Hi, have you seen this boy anywhere? He's about this much taller than me. The kids stared at the picture, then shook their heads. Sakura stood straight. Arigato. She mumbled, disappointed. The kids hummed, then ran off. Sakura, Kakashi started. There's still the possibility, although I don't want to believe it. But he couldn't bring himself to say it. Nevertheless, Sakura understood what he was going at. She didn't want to believe it either, but the more they looked, the more it seemed likely to be true. Excuse me, Momaro-chan, Miss Pink, a voice called. Kakashi and Sakura turned around to see a very old man, slowly walking over, leaning on a wooden cane. Momaro-chan? Nandiso-ka? What is that? Sakura thought to herself in anger. Can you show me that photo? He asked in an old voice. Hi, she answered, doing as he said. He put the picture about 2 centimeters away from his eyes, and narrowed them, focusing all his powers to see. Hi. That's him all right, he finally said with a shaky smile, giving the picture back to Sakura. Dare? Who? Kakashi asked. Kei-san. Kei-san? That was from Sakura. Hi, Kei-san, he lives with Sayuri. I've seen them come to the market a few times, nice kids, very polite. But it's defiantly the boy from the picture. He lives with Sayuri-chan. He was about to repeat the record, when Sakura interrupted excitedly. Doko? Where? Huh? Oh, in the east side of the forest. Sayuri-chan has a cabin, I think about 30 meters from here, he said. Sakura immediately took off in the direction the old man pointed, not even waiting for him to finish his sentence. Arigatou gozaimasu. Thank you, Kakashi nodded quickly, before taking off after the racing Sakura. Sakura, mate! Wait, Kakashi called. But Sakura didn't slow down. Kakashi caught up to her. Listen to me, Sakura, there's one last thing we didn't talk about. What's there to talk about? We're so near Naruto. He's alive, she said, her breath quickening. Exactly, Kakashi said firmly, causing Sakura to slow down and stop. Exactly? She repeated, wide-eyed. Kakashi nodded. That means that this whole time he's been alive, so why didn't he come back to Konoha? He said. That put Sakura in a state of confusion. Why? She shook her head. I'm sure he has a good reason, she said determinedly, as she started running again. Kakashi sighed and did the same. There was a clearing at a distance. Sakura picked up her speed, and jumped out of the trees. And there he was, hanging some laundry, white sheets swaying in the wind blocking the view every few seconds, but it was him, he was alive, standing in front of her. "Naruto!" she yelled in a tear-filled voice, dashing towards him. He turned to her surprised, she pulled him into a hug. "Naruto, it's so good to see you! I thought you were dead. We all did. Wait until they all see you alive. Hinata will be so happy." But Naruto didn't say anything, he was staring at her surprised. Finally he spoke. "Who are you?" Sakura stepped back, and stared at his face in shock. "What's the meaning of this?" "K-san. Where did you put?" A girl called from a distance, then stopped when she Sakura, and Kakashi at a distance. "And I-san, who's this?" she asked, grabbing his arm. "And I-san?" Sakura yelled, totally confused. Kakashi stepped towards them. "Excuse me, miss, is this your brother?" he asked, pointing at the blonde. "Well, sort of. Not really. I mean," she stuttered, tightening her grasp on the blonde's arm. The blonde felt Sayuri's fear in her grip. "I'm sorry, do you two want something?" he asked. Kakashi gave a meaningful look to Sakura. Naruto obviously has no idea who they are. "Naruto," Kakashi began. "And who's this Naruto you keep talking about?" the blonde burst. Kakashi sighed once more, glimpsing over at Sakura. It was just as he feared. He lifted the picture up in the blonde's face. "This is Naruto," he said. The blonde stared at the picture shocked. Isn't that you, K-san?" Sayuri said hesitantly, peeking at the picture. The blonde turned to the other two. "What's the meaning of this?" he asked suspiciously, knotting his brows. "This is you. Uzumaki Naruto, a genin from the village of Konoha," Kakashi explained. "You were lost during a mission about a month ago. Everyone in the village was looking for you, but finally we found you." Sakura butted in. Naruto turned and looked at Sayuri. She looked up at him with fear, wrapping her arms tighter around his arm. The blonde turned back to the two ninjas confused. "Our point is, Naruto, we want you to come back to Konoha with us," Kakashi said in answer to Naruto's confused stares. "Yes, everyone will be thrilled to see you again, Naruto," Sakura said, excited. "I can't wait to see the shock on their faces, to see that you're still alive and—" "No!" Sayuri suddenly yelled. "I won't let you take Kei-san away from me," she added, standing in front of the blonde and spreading her hands. The blonde gave the girl a sympathetic look, as did Sakura and Kakashi. "Look, this is too much information for me all at once, but I just don't remember anything of it," the blonde said, stepping in front of Sayuri. "Kakashi-sensei?" Sakura turned around. He must have lost his memory when he fell off the cliff," Kakashi said, thinking. Sakura's eyes widened with horror. I fell off a cliff," the blonde stuttered, seeming to be shocked. "L lost his memory?" Sakura repeated. Sayuri remained silent, she already knew that. "Well. You belong back at Konoha. Naruto," Sakura tried. The blonde looked over his shoulder at Sayuri, she had tears in her eyes. "Kei-san?" she whispered. He turned to the two ninjas. "I'm sorry, but this is now my home, and by the way, it's Kei, not Naruto." And with that said, he took Sayuri by the hand and turned towards the cabin. "Nah, Kei-san," the masked ninja called. Kei peeked over his shoulder. "Our offer still goes, we'll give you a day to think about it, and if you still want to stay, we'll leave you alone," Kakashi said, not letting any of his emotions to seep into his words. Kei listened to him until he was done, then turned back to the house. "Kakashi-sensei," Sakura protested. "Let's go, Sakura," Kakashi glared. "Hi," she whispered obediently. And with that they were off. Kei peered over his shoulder one more time, checking if the two ninjas had left. Then sighed as he walked into the cabin with a very content Sayuri. "Kakashi-sensei." "Why?" Sakura protested from her hiding place in the bushes. "Trust me, Sakura, he'll come back." The blonde sat on the roof that night, quietly watching the gossiping star, in the serenity of the night. It was a crescent moon, and only a few small clouds crossed in the road of the night, relying on the gentle streams of moonlight to shine on their path, and the light breeze to guide their way. He would always come sit up here when he felt the need for privacy, which was on rare occasions when he really needed to do some thinking, because he really hated the feeling of being alone, and he didn't really understand that fear. However, tonight he was indeed in need to think deeply, for he had a lot to think about. He sighed. Kei-san? He heard a voice whisper softly. Ah, Sayuri-chan, he said back, with a faint smile. Sayuri hesitated. Kei rarely ever addresses her with chan, unless he is feeling somewhat uncomfortable. She scarcely climbed onto the roof. She sat next to him, and joined him in gazing at the stars. They're very beautiful, she said with a slight smile. Kei only nodded in response, accompanied with a pale smile. Sayuri sighed. Kei-san. Sayuri started in a sad voice, hugging her knees. I understand that you. It's alright, Sayuri-chan, really, Kei said with a sad smile. You don't have to worry, I'm staying as long as you need me. He added, then looked away. Sayuri looked at his face with sad eyes. She sighed and rested her chin on her arms. You really want to know, don't you? Sayuri started, gazing ahead. She knew that not knowing was torturing him. You can go, she said. Sayuri-chan, you don't. She refused. You need to go with those ninjas, find out who you are. Who am I to stop you? She smiled lightly. You figure out things. Okay? She winked. Sayuri, Kei whispered gratefully. She tilted her head and smiled, then gasped when Kei pulled her into a tight hug. Thank you, he said, closing his eyes. And, I'm sorry this story is moving so slowly, it's bugging the hell out of me, but I can't really do much to change that. Please leave a review. I really want to know what you think of the story, or else why am I posting it? Naruto. You ready? The pink-haired kunoichi said with a smile. The blonde just glanced over at her annoyed, but she didn't notice. Sayuri stood back, watching silently. Kei felt his heart quiver at the thought of leaving her alone again, then it hit him, he doesn't have to leave her alone. Kakashi-san, right? He said, stepping towards the masked ninja. The mentioned person turned around, with a questioning look in his visible eye. Is it possible for Sayuri to come with me to your village? Our village? The blonde asked. Kakashi quickly figured that the blonde wasn't really asking, he already seemed to have made up his mind. But that wasn't a problem anyway. Sure, he said simply. Sayuri's eyes widened. She had never considered leaving her cabin, her home. But the look of excitement on Kei's face clearly said that she had no choice. Kakashi-sensei, why aren't we running at our full speed? It's going to take much longer to get back to Konoha this way. Sakura moaned. Because we have 2 civilians with us, that can't run as fast as us, Sakura, Kakashi said, peering over his shoulder at the blonde and his friend. But Naruto, Sakura began arguing. Naruto no longer remembers anything about himself, including all his ninja training. He is a civilian. For now, at least. Kakashi interrupted. Sakura looked away with a pained look on her face. Naruto didn't only forget about himself, but he forgot about everything and everyone in his life. Including her. Don't worry, Sakura, I'm sure Hokage-sama can fix whatever's wrong with him, Kakashi said in an attempt to assure her. She forced out a pale smile, but she wasn't sure if she believed him or not, because she too was a medical ninja, but she couldn't find the reason for this odd memory loss. Speaking of Tsunade-sama, does she know about the developments in our mission? Sakura asked, trying to mask her worries. Kakashi picked up on that and looked away. Yes, I sent Pakun to her with some details last night. I believe he would have reached her by now, he answered in a semi-formal manner. That's good, she whispered. That's good. The trip to Konoha was long and tiring. By the end of the first day, Sayuri had already doubted that she made the wrong decision to come along. But she quickly pushed those thoughts aside, as she argued that it was all worth it for Kei-san. However, those thoughts insisted on visiting her constantly for the next 3 days of traveling, even though Sayuri insisted that they were not welcome. Kei, on the other hand, was having much more problems with his inner thoughts than she was. He wasn't really sure what to think. He had already figured that learning about his old self is most likely what he should do, but there was always that nagging doubt. He didn't understand what he was afraid of, but he knew he'd probably find out. There was also the fear that he would never regain his memories. He didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but he figured that it was a bad thing. Everyone was lost in their own world of worries and thoughts, including Sakura, but her main fear was Kei's latest one. What if Naruto never regained his memory? How would that work? She had never envisioned a future without Naruto being in it. But she quickly shook her thoughts off. She'd better not think like that. We should reach Konoha in about 3.5 hours, Sakura said, looking up at the peaks of blue sky between the many leaves. Sayuri let out a short sigh. She was tired of traveling. She wished that she could just teleport herself. Or maybe, fast forward time. Sayuri sighed again, knowing that she was fantasizing. She tuned out the world, as she watched Bobo jumping around as he chased something. "We'll be back in about 10 minutes," the masked ninja suddenly said, as he and the pink-haired ninja backed their packs. "We're just going to get some water, and do a quick look around the area." "Naruto," Sakura added, addressing her blonde friend. Sayuri peered at her annoyed. Was she purposely ignoring her? Or was she just oblivious to her own actions? The two ninjas jumped into the trees, with one leap. Sayuri turned her gaze back to the ground, and let out another sigh. "Is something bothering you, Sayuri?" she suddenly heard Kei's voice. She looked up at him for a moment, not knowing what was actually bothering her. "Aye," she said, forcing out a pale smile. "Nothing at all," she added, trying her best to sound cheerful. The blonde directed a concerned stare towards her, and his lips parted as he was about to say something in attempt to comfort her. But his lips quickly closed tightly as he heard a very faint sound. He listened for a brief moment before saying in a low voice, "Sayuri, did you hear that?" Sayuri looked up at him. "Huh," she said. "Did you hear that?" he repeated, straining to hear more. Sayuri remained silent, trying to hear anything. "And no, I don't hear anything." Naruto's brows creased as he nervously looked around. "No, I'm sure I heard." He cut his sentence short at the sight of two men, who suddenly appeared in the clearing. Naruto tensed, while Sayuri jumped up from her place with a gasp. Bobo didn't seem to like the two men as he too tensed and let out a low, fierce growl. The men were very gruff-looking, and wore a ninja protector on their person. They smirked contently, eyeing the many baggage thrown here and there. Well, what do we have here?" the smaller man suddenly said as he took a step forward. "You know, you kids shouldn't be camping out here. It could be—" He paused for a second, then added as his devious smile widened, "dangerous." Sayuri fixed a frightful stare on the two men, but at the same time tried to inch her way to Kei's side. "Stay right where you are, girlie," the shorter man said, pointing a long kunai at the petite girl. Sayuri instantly froze in her place, her heart pounding harder than it ever had. She gulped in weakly as she slowly turned to look at Kei for help. Kei formed a tight fist, while the larger man started moving closer as well. "Ah, a fighter, aren't you?" the shorter man said with a smug smile, noticing Kei's slow tensing. The teen didn't respond as he tried to think of something that could save the two of them. At that moment, the larger man was opening the bags and spilling them all over the forest ground. His partner gave him a careless glance over the shoulder, then turned back to the two teenagers with a mysterious gleam in his eyes. Sayuri shrunk into herself at his frightening glares, whilst Kei glared right back at him fearlessly. Their eyes met for a tense moment before the man suddenly turned his mischievous, beady eyes towards the girl. Sayuri couldn't help but flinch at the evil sparkle that suddenly filled the man's eyes. "Yuji, grab the girl, she's coming with us," he ordered, satisfaction filling his voice and eyes as they met the blonde's. It was only a very short second that Kei took before launching himself at the man with all his anger. "The hell you are!" he yelled, throwing a fist straight to the man's face. But the man simply ducked to the right, with an amused smirk on his lips. "You're too slow, kid," he said, as he was suddenly standing behind the blonde, a kunai piercing the flesh of his neck slightly. Kei fearlessly thrashed at the man, who was able to evade him with incredible ease. At the same time, the other man was walking towards Sayuri with slow, confident steps, knowing that he had all the time in the world. The girl cowered back, tears swelling in her eyes. The man took another step closer, causing Sayuri to shriek in fear. "And I send help," she yelped, tears streaming on her cheeks. At that, her faithful dog launched at the man, barking viciously as he sank his teeth on the large man's muscles. But the man only let out a low growl as he pulled the dog away from his skin and then kicked him away. Bobo let out a whimper as he flew into the air, then another as his head smacked into a tree and he slid down it. Kei failed to hear Sayuri's low cries for Bobo as the man had him in a neck lock, slowly squeezing and cutting off the boy's air supply. He kicked back, but hit nothing. The man suddenly threw Kei to the ground. And as the boy wheezed as the air slowly re-entered his lungs, the man cruelly kicked him in the chest, knocking the air back out and sending the blonde a few feet into the air. Lying on the ground next to a large tree, Kei struggled to push himself up, hearing Sayuri screaming his name. But just as he was able to lift his chest a few inches off the dirt, he received an extremely powerful strike, knocking him out cold. "No, Kei-san!" Sayuri cried desperately. The whole situation was overwhelmingly hopeless. Being tied to a large tree, surrounded by scary people, and knowing that no one can help, really can get to you. For some reason, the man had decided to stay there and tie Sayuri to a tree with a large rough rope. Both Kei and Bobo were still out cold. One of the two men was going through the small group's things, while the other sat on a large tree trunk watching his friend thoughtfully. Sayuri was careful not even to breathe too loud, afraid that she might somehow set her two captors off. The shorter man, who seemed to be the head of the whole thing, stood up eyeing Sayer. Maliciously, she jolted violently as the man walked towards her. "Stay away from me!" she screamed, fighting her bounds. The man let out a short, belittling laugh and continued, until he was standing right next to the bound girl. Tears filled her eyes as the man stared at her. "No," she gasped as he extended a hand towards her face. She ducked her head and closed her eyes, however the hand didn't touch her, continuing traveling up. The man rested on his arm, leaning in towards Sayuri until she could feel his hot, steady breaths on her face. He extended his other hand and grabbed a lock of her short brown hair and fiddled with for a second. "You're quite pretty, aren't you?" he said with a confident smirk. Sayuri's eyes were overflowing with tears as she looked into the man's merciless eyes. He moved his hand from her hair to her chin, gripping it tightly. She tried to turn her head away, but he held her face in place, leaning towards her. "No!" she screamed again, this time doing something more effective. She smashed her forehead against his nose with all her force. He let out an angry grunt, taking a step back. "You brat," he spat, glaring at her murderously. "I was going to let you live, but now I just changed my mind," he burst. Her heart pounded with fear as the guy quickly slipped out a kunai, stepping towards her. With the kunai holding hand, he ripped the ropes. As they fell, his other hand gripped her neck tightly, pinning her to the tree. He glared at her for a moment before dragging her across the tree trunk, then throwing her to the ground. She let out a short screech as she fell to her face. The dirt mixed with the blood from her newly split lip. She shrieked again as the man grabbed her from the back of her neck, flinging her back with enormous force. Sayuri let out a pained gasp as her back hit into a tree. She fell to her face again, struggling to move. She gasped again as the man stood over her. "Please!" she cried as he grabbed her hair and pulled her to her feet. "I'm not even close to finished, girlie," the man said with a mixture of contempt and anger. There was a very short pause. As the man seemed to think something over, he searched his sadistic brain for the cruelest possible thing at the moment. "Kill the blonde," he suddenly ordered sternly, an odd gleam appearing in his eyes. "Kill the blonde to save your life." He paused. "I want to watch you carve him open with your own hands." She blinked at him in shock. "What?" she whispered with disbelief. "Kill the blonde!" she yelled viciously, causing her to scream in fear. "Takeo, you're..." the other man said worriedly, creasing his brows and slowly standing up. "Do not interfere!" his partner ordered, shooting him a murderous glare. "And you! Kill the blonde now or I'll rip your throat out," he said to Sayuri, extending a hand towards her. Sayuri jumped back, but tripped on one of their empty backpacks. She fell on her back with a surprised shriek. She screamed as the man stood over her, grabbing her from her wrist and lifting her into the air. She kicked her legs about as she dangled from her wrist, then let out a loud scream as the man squeezed it powerfully, nearly snapping it. "Hey, you let go of her!" a voice suddenly called from behind. The man turned around to see the blonde boy awake. He was panting slightly and leaning against a tree trunk. "And I-san!" Sayuri joyfully yelled, forgetting the position she was in. Kei turned to her, then turned to the man, his eyes filled with anger she had never seen before. But the man only smirked confidently. "Hold this," he suddenly ordered, flinging Sayuri towards his partner. She let out a scream as she found herself flying back in the air. The large man caught the small girl with great ease, holding her between his muscular arms until his partner was through with what he was doing. "Sayuri!" Naruto shouted, charging to her aid. "Where do you think you're going?" Takeo said mockingly, kneeing the teen in the stomach. Kei gasped as his body was suddenly sent flying in the opposite direction, then gasped harder as his back slammed into a tree. "K3!" Sayuri screamed, struggling to free herself from the iron grip. The man had jumped over to where Kei had fallen. He bent over confidently, grabbing the boy from the neck with a powerful grip. He lifted Kei up, pinning him to the tree by the neck, slowly tightening his grip. Sayuri cried intensely, watching her best friend's face as it grew redder. "Kei," she whispered weakly, her resistance fading to nothing. But suddenly out of nowhere appeared the masked ninja. He jumped out of the tall tree aiming a kick to the shorter man's chest. "Sakura," he said in an ordering voice. Out of another angle came out the pink-haired ninja. She jumped out of the high tree standing in front of the large man. Sayuri stared at the girl with fear as the man holding her tightened his grip around her. "Stay away, little girl, I don't want to hurt you," he growled threateningly, pointing at Sakura with his free hand. The female ninja smirked confidently. "Little girl?" she scoffed, raising a brow. Her smirk soon disappeared as she shifted her foot to the side and tightened her black glove. She confidently glared at the man for a second, before lunging at him, her fist glowing in a threatening green light. The man only had a few seconds to react as the emerald-eyed girl came at him with a battle cry, her fist thirsting to land a hit. Apparently the man didn't react fast enough, because by the time the next second ended, Sakura had jumped into the air, then came down, her punch making contact with the man's cheekbone, cracking it, and sending him flying a few meters back. As the man started to fly in the opposite direction, Sakura grabbed Sayuri's hand, pulling her out of the man's grip. The girl stumbled towards Sakura. "Are you alright?" she asked, smiling kindly. Sayuri was unable to respond. She stared at Sakura with tears in her eyes, then collapsed to her knees. Sakura turned her gaze to look behind her. She watched calmly as her teacher finished off the other man. Her gaze then shifted down to see her friend on the forest ground panting for air. "Naruto!" she gasped, dashing to his side. Sayuri stared at her with surprise as she picked her friend up, leaning him against the tree. She couldn't hear what the short-haired girl was saying, but she watched as the girl lifted the blonde's top. A green light then formed around her hand. Sayuri turned her gaze to look at Naruto's face. He seemed to be calmer as he closed his eyes, leaning his head back and surrendering to the other girl. "Are you alright?" she suddenly heard a voice say with a soft touch to her shoulder. She looked up at the masked ninja as he was crouched next to her, a fatherly glow in his visible eye. Tears welled up in Sayuri's eyes as she shook her head meaninglessly. "You are safe now," she heard the ninja say warmly. She continued staring at her blonde friend, as a small smile formed on his lips in reaction to what the pink-haired girl was saying. She struggled to stand on her feet. She nearly fell but then leaned on the ninja's arm. Using him as support, she steadied herself on her feet, then slowly inched her way to Kei's side. "Anai-san?" she whispered fearfully. Kei's eyes suddenly shot open. "Sayuri," he gasped, staring at her wide-eyed. He tried to pull himself up, but fell back down as intense pain shot through his leg. "Sayuri, he started, a guilty look imprinted on his features. "Anai-san," Sayuri cried, throwing herself onto his chest. Kei winced in pain, but didn't let it show as he embraced the petite girl in a gentle hug, stroking her hair and back with a calm smile. "We're okay now, Sayuri, you're safe," he assured her as she sobbed into his chest. "Sakura-san, would you heal her first?" Kei said, turning to the kunoichi. "But Naruto," Sakura protested, nodding her brows with concern, eyeing his many wounds. "Please, Sakura," the blonde said, a pleading look in his eyes. "Hi," she murmured weakly, turning towards the brunette. Sayuri turned towards Kei's face. He flashed an encouraging smile. "Please, Sayuri." "For me?" Sayuri nodded slightly, forcing out a pale smile. And so Sakura placed her hands on Sayuri's wounds. It was a brief moment until a green glow formed around her hands. The brunette winced as she felt a slight prick, but then stared in awe as she watched her cuts fade away. "After Sakura is done healing, everyone will be off," the masked ninja said, looking around in thought. /N, so that's that. I don't have anything to add to this chapter. I'd just appreciate it greatly if more people would review. Chapter 4. /N. As a reply to the anonymous reviewer, I'd like to say that you have nothing to worry about. The story is already complete in my files. I simply post a new chapter every 3 days or so. And I thank him /or her and Lalapo for review my story, since I can't do so in a private message. A friend in demand. A.K. Choices. Everyone is going to be so excited to see you, Naruto, the pink-headed girl exclaimed, as the group neared Konoha. Sayuri peered over at the girl, annoyed. She hated when she called Kei Naruto. It sounded so stupid, Naruto. However, she then sighed. That was who Kei was. He was Naruto. Kei smiled slightly, trying to mask all the fear he was feeling. But then Sayuri held his hand, she felt it shake slightly in anticipation. She glanced over at his face, then looked forwards once more, tightening her grip on his hand. The large gates of the large village grew closer and closer. Everybody's heart pounded harder as the moment of confrontation neared. "This is it," Kakashi murmured, seeing the lineup of Konoha ninjas at the gate. Kei's heart trembled and so did Sayuri's. Sakura smiled proudly as she spotted the great anticipation in her friend's eyes. It wasn't long until the four stood in front of the line 2 Jaws, one civilian, and one other person. Utter silence took over as none of the Konoha ninjas knew what to say. It was a mixture of deep shock and great joy. "And Naruto?" Kiba said, suddenly breaking the silence as he stepped forward. There was a short pause. "So I've heard." The blonde nervously smiled slightly. The brown-haired boy stepped closer and breathed in deeply. "How it really is you!" he suddenly yelled, patting the blonde on the back roughly. The others sighed with relief, then exchanged wide smiles and quickly crowded around him, patting his back, all talking at once, smiling and joking and such. Sayuri got pushed left and right, then out of the way, no one noticing her existence. It gave her an awful feeling down to her core. Naruto! A voice called loudly, approaching the gang quickly. Everyone turned around to see a plump boy with long orange hair running towards them like a tornado. He hurried over to the blonde, pushing the others aside, and pulled him into a bone-crushing squeeze, tears streaming down his face. "I thought you were dead, Naruto," he said loudly. "See, can't breath," the blonde wheezed. The others exchanged laughing looks. "Yeah, by the way," a girl with two brown buns started cautiously, as the large boy released his grip. "I heard that you lost your memory. Is that true?" she asked curiously. The blonde nodded shyly. "Yeah," he answered, looking at that ground. "So, why you don't? I remember any of us?" A girl with long black hair stuttered, blushing for no reason. "Nod. I don't remember anything of my past life," the blonde answered. "Does that include the 6,500 Rios? To that I don't owe you?" The brown-haired boy said slowly, his eyes shifting right and left. Kei peered at him. He can easily tell what kind of a friend this boy was. Others butted in with their questions and comments, Kei trying to answer them all, but careful about what he said. Sayuri, of course, got pushed away, none of them noticing. She looked at the group hesitantly, but no one saw her, no one even realized her existence. She looked at her good friend Kei, but he was too occupied with the others to see her. She felt a firm grip of sadness grab her heart and twist it. She looked at Kei one more time, hoping that he'd see her, but he didn't. It was a mistake to come along. She knew that all along. He is better off without her. Reluctantly on her part, a sad tear pushed its way into her eye, but did not dare to leave it. These Konoha people will look up for him, they really care for him, that's obvious. It's where he belongs, she thought to herself, a faint smile on her lips. "Come on, Bobo." She signaled for her dog to follow. As she slowly walked away, she believed in her heart of hearts that she was doing the best thing for Kei. The dog, of course, confused, hesitated to leave his good buddy Kei. But as of his nature, he followed his older owner, his leader, Sayuri, in her lonely road. Suddenly he realized something that was missing. He looked around worriedly, looking for one certain someone. He saw her walking away with a heavy heart and steps. Why was she leaving? He was confused. The blonde pushed past the crowding teens. Despite their surprised and confused looks, he walked towards her. As far as he cared, there was no one else in the world besides him and Sayuri. "Sayuri," his warm voice rang, as his firm yet gentle grip grabbed her arm. She didn't turn around at first, she was afraid he'd see her tears. But he was too kind, too warm, too loving to ignore. She turned around so that her eyes would meet his deep, warm, understanding ones. Without having to speak a word, he understood everything. He gently took her by the hand and led her to the others. The ninjas stared at him and Sayuri with surprised expressions. Sayuri stared at the ground, blushing heavily with all the attention. "This is Sayuri. She's the person who saved me and took care of me. She gave me a home to stay in and treated me like family," Kei said in a calm voice. Sayuri bit her lip. She hated to be in the spotlight. However, Kei was holding her hand tightly, as he smiled proudly. That put her a bit at ease. "Well, hello, Sayuri," one of the Konoha ninjas called out. And as if that was a spark, The rest all started talking at once, greeting her and smiling. Kei turned to Sayuri and gave her a calm smile. She smiled back shyly. Kei is always right, even when he said nothing. Hey, where's that lazy bum Shikamaru? The pink-haired kunoichi suddenly said. How rude! She stomped her foot annoyed. How dare he not come and greet his friend that has just come out of an ordeal? She added, looking around. Actually, Chuji's voice said. He was tied up with Hokage-sama, doing some paperwork. So he wasn't able to be here. He continued, smiling sheepishly, as if it was his fault. He is such a baka. A blonde girl huffed, crossing her arms. Oh yeah, speaking of Tsunade-sama. We should go over and see her, Sakura said thoughtfully. Who of you is going to come with me? She added, turning to her pals. I can't. The brown-haired boy smiled. I have a mission with Hinata out of Konoha. The girl with the long black hair nodded in agreement. And I have to get back to the store. The blonde girl nodded, pointing her thumb over her shoulder and closing her eyes. I have to get back to target practice. The brunette with the Chinese bun said. I'm training with my father. A boy with white eyes said calmly. Shuji? Sakura turned to the husky boy. Sorry, Sakura-chan, I have things to do, he said, then smiled kindly. Don't worry, Sakura-san. I'll go with you. A boy with round eyes and black hair yelled with excitement. Baka! The brunette yelled, slapping him upside the head. Remember? Guy-sensei wanted you to train with him until tomorrow? She added, putting her hands on her hips. Oh yeah, he whispered. Sorry, Sakura-chan, I can't come with you, he added in a semi-formal manner. Shino? Sakura said with desperation, turning to a fully covered boy. Sorry, Sakura-san, I'm going bug collecting, it's very important, he answered in a gloomy voice. There was silence, before all the teens started peeling away, with simple goodbyes and apologies. Well, I guess it's just us. The pink ninja sighed, oh well. Naruto! A blonde woman gasped, jumping out of her seat from behind her desk. A lady with short back hair stood behind her, joy plastered on her face. And Naruto, thank God you're alright, she said, smiling kindly, as she hugged a small pink pig. Naruto, this is Tsunade-sama, our 5th Hokage, the masked ninja noted, putting Kei out of his confusion. This lady is Hokage? She doesn't look older than 30? Kei thought to himself as he bowed slightly. Tsunade buried all her emotions as she slowly sat back down. She should try to act the title she holds. It's good to see you're alright and in one piece, Naruto, the blonde woman said in a choked voice. Kei didn't know what to say in this awkward position. Didamo arigato gozaimasu, he murmured. Just a very polite manner to say thank you. Tsunade exchanged a brief look with her assistant. Naruto is much calmer and politer. However, that was more unsettling. Only Sakura didn't notice that. She was smiling victoriously as if she was the cause of Naruto's return. We were hoping that you'd examine Naruto and check the reason for his memory loss, Kakashi said, breaking the silence that came over after Naruto's last sentence. Tsunade paused for a moment, then let her medic's side take charge. Sure, she answered briefly, getting up from her chair. After a fairly awkward examination, for Kei at least, Tsunade stood back, and then signaled for Kakashi to follow her out of the room. I checked Naruto from head to toe, Tsunade sighed. And I found absolutely no physical cause for this odd memory loss. Do you know what that means? Kakashi didn't answer, knowing that the Hokage was basically talking to herself. It means that the whole problem is in his head. Naruto is physically able to remember, but there is something stopping him, she added, then paused for a very brief moment. More accurately, Naruto doesn't want to remember. Here we are, Sakura said, giving a slight hand gesture, leading Naruto into his old apartment. The blonde stepped in, looking around curiously. Sayuri followed hesitantly. This is where I lived? Live? The blue-eyed boy murmured. Hi, Sakura answered lowly, watching him examine the one-room apartment. There was nothing special about the place that caught Kei's eye. He headed over to the bed when he noticed a framed photograph. He extended a steady hand to pick it up, not noticing a sudden sad look that appeared in Sakura's eyes. He looked at the people in the picture. The blonde is obviously him. Hee, you looked kinda funny, Kei-san. Sayuri smiled, peeking at the picture. The pink-haired ninja has to be Sakura-san, and that's their masked sensei. His heart suddenly froze when his eyes landed on the black-haired boy in the picture. His heart felt like a piece of hard ice, and his chest was tight. He got an awful taste of a bad memory in his mouth as a bitter chill ran through his spine. But all of that was oddly merged with an overwhelming feeling of longing. Who is that? Haven't seen him around here? Kate pointed at the black-haired, ticked-off boy in the photo. His voice was cracked, and his throat feeling oddly dry. That's Sasuke. Kuin, Sakura said sadly, looking at the ground, as she fought back the bitter lump in her throat. He, isn't in Konoha anymore, she added, turning away. Although Kei had the urge to know more, this particular subject seemed to be a sensitive one. He'd rather try on another day in a more careful manner. Thank you, Sakura-san, he mumbled with a forced smile. Huh? Oh yeah, well, I'll let you get used to the place. The pink-haired girl, Elle said with nervous smile. I'll come back tomorrow morning, she added, leaving the apartment. Kei paused for a moment until Sakura left, then he let out a sigh, and let his fake smile disappear. Sayuri walked up from behind, putting her small warm hand on his shoulder. She gave him an encouraging smile. The night finally came, and with it came the overwhelming urge to just drop dead from exhaustion for a few hours. Sayuri stood to the side, thoughtfully staring at Bobo as he slept. She turned to Kei, about to say something. Here, you sleep on the bed, I'll sleep on the ground, he said, setting a sleeping bag next to the bed. But, Sayuri protested weakly, feeling guilty. Good night, Sayuri-chan. Kei yawned, as he was already under the covers. Sayuri sighed with defeat, and then climbed into the bed, pulling the covers to her ear. Good night. /N. So I guess this chapter is a bit short compared to my last chapter, but I have lots of trouble trying to figure out how to split my chapters decently. Please leave a review, so I can know you were here, and what you thought, and I'll get back to you. Chapter 5. /N. Thanks to all the anonymous reviewers, since they didn't get their thank yous yet. I really do appreciate the support. A friend in demand. A.K. Choices. Sayuri woke the next morning at the sound of a faint knock at the door. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and yawned as the knocks continued. She looked over at the ground. Kei wasn't sleeping next to her. The knocks continued. She sighed and rolled out of bed, stumbling over to the door, so she could satisfy this polite, yet persistent, visitor. Sayuri cracked the door open to see a tall boy with black hair pulled back into a messy high ponytail. Yes? She said, blinking curiously. He turned to her with slight discomfort, and stared at her with intelligent eyes. Is Naruto here? He finally asked in a laid-back attitude, not bothering to take his hands out of his pockets, or be polite enough to introduce himself. However, Sayuri isn't the kind of person to judge people from their appearance. She shook her head. No, he must have left earlier this morning. I was sleeping, she said in a low voice, still hiding half her body behind the wooden door. The boy stared at her blankly for a few moments, then sighed. Well, I'll just go find him then, he mumbled to himself, turning to leave. Excuse me, Sayuri called. The boy turned around with a lazy, annoyed, questioning look on his face. Would you mind if I came with you? I don't know anyone in this village besides Kei-san, she stuttered, blushing shyly. The boy stared at her blankly for a few seconds. Sure, he sighed, starting to walk away again. Hey, wait up. Shikamaru heard the girl call from behind him as he reached the street. He didn't turn around, but he slowed down, letting her catch up with him. A medium-sized dog tagged along. Sayuri grunted and gasped as she walked in the crowded streets of Konoha. She wasn't used to being around so much people. They pushed her from side to side, as she struggled to keep up with the oddly silent boy. Everyone here is so rude, she thought to herself in a huff. However, she seemed to be the only person who thought so. Then someone pushed her roughly. Out of an automatic impulse, she grabbed onto the boy's arm, cowering towards his shoulder. 2 seconds later, she realized that it wasn't Kei's arm that she's holding onto so tightly. She jumped back, blushing heavily. Gogo Manasai. Sorry, she stuttered at the boy, who continued glancing at her from the corner of his eye. He didn't comment, and Sayuri remained silent for some time too. I'm Sayuri, she suddenly said in a low voice, realizing that she hadn't introduced herself yet. The boy gave her another one of his lazy yet somehow piercing glances before answering, Nara Shikamaru, surname before first name, as his costume in Japan. There were a few more minutes of silence. Do you know where Kei-san is? Sayuri asked timidly. This guy seemed intimidating to her, with his weird glances, piercing eyes, and cold attitude. The boy looked away, a thoughtful look on his face. I think so, he said in a low voice shortly after. Sayuri remained quiet for the rest of the way, as did the Shikamaru character. Well, most of the way, because at one point Sayuri asked, Shikamaru-san? He turned to her, no sign of interest on his face. What's going to happen to Kei-san? She asked hesitantly, looking every place aside from Shikamaru's face. The intelligent shinobi seemed to be mildly interested in what she was saying, as he waited for her to elaborate. I mean, what if he never gets his memory back? Then what would happen? She added, twiddling her fingers. The boy remained silent for a few moments, as he does every time before he answers. Well, he'll probably have to learn everything about his past life, and then start anew, the boy answered, his tone of voice indicating that he was still in thought. But wasn't. I mean, isn't he a ninja? Sayuri asked, finally looking at the tall boy's face. The usual pause. I don't think he'll be continuing his life as a ninja. Not unless he regains his memories. Sayuri got very quiet after that, thinking about the boy's words. Bobo seemed to understand his owner, and in respect of her thoughts, he didn't make another sound for a while. There he is. Just as I expected, the boy suddenly said, smirking contently. Sayuri turned around to see a small ramen shop. She could see behind the flaps Kei sitting at the high chairs. Kei-san! She exclaimed excitedly, running towards her blonde friend, completely forgetting the other boy. The blonde turned around and smiled widely at his friend. Ah, Sayuri-chan, he said in a calm voice. Sayuri's smile widened. She opened her mouth about to say something when she saw a girl with pink hair sitting next to Kei. The girl turned around and stared at the two for a second before smiling. Sayuri stopped in her place. She suddenly felt a feeling building up in her heart. Could it be? Was she jealous? Never before had she ever felt this way before, it just wasn't in her nature. Ah, Shikamaru. Sayuri-chan, Sakura said with a small smile as she and Naruto left the ramen shop. I was just taking Naruto for a bowl of ramen, she added with a wide smile, wrapping her arm around Kei's. That only made Sayuri feel worse. Her smile suddenly disappeared as she waited for the two to reach her. Sayuri-chan, you found me, he said with a smile. And, you are? He added questioningly, turning to Shikamaru. The black-haired boy extended a hand. Naro, Shikamaru. Kei shook his hand, not knowing what to say. This boy might have been his best friend, and he doesn't remember anything about him. Did you enjoy the ramen? Shikamaru asked after a few minutes of awkward silence. And not really, I thought it was too oily. But at the same time I couldn't stop, Naruto said, smiling. That's because you used to love ramen. Your current personality might not like it. But the old you is still in there somewhere. Shikamaru's words sent each person into a world of thoughts. So what are you planning on doing next? Shikamaru asked suddenly, turning to Naruto and Sakura. Well, I wanted to. Sakura started with a happy smile. Hey, weren't you supposed to be at the Hokage's office half an hour ago? Shikamaru suddenly interrupted, pointing at Sakura with a gleam of remembrance in his eyes. Oh crap, you're right! Sakura yelled, a terrored look on her face. Damn it, Shikamaru! Why didn't say that since the beginning? Baka! She added, dashing away. Shikamaru shrugged, although she was already out of sight. So, what were you doing here? Sayuri asked Kei, her attitude seeming to be a bit dry. Well actually, Sakura-san came early this morning and asked that I'd go for a walk with her. You were sleeping deeply and I didn't want to disturb you, he answered with a sheepish smile. There were a few more minutes of silence, then Shikamaru said with a smile. Well, I still have some time before I have to get back to working. How about we walk and talk? He told Naruto, taking a step to the side, so that the three could walk next to each other. After a few minutes of walking in total silence, Shikamaru suddenly said, How about I introduce you to some of your old friends? Naruto nodded slightly. Okay, so, I'll just start with your own team. There's Haruno Sakura, the girl you were with earlier. She's a medical ninja trained under the Hokage herself. She also has high skills in hand-to-hand combat. Then there's Hatake Kakashi, he's your sensei. He's a top-rank ninja, one of the best. Shikamaru paused to let Naruto absorb the information, then continued. Next there is my team. Besides me there is Yamanaka Ino, she's also a medical ninja. She possessed the Yamanaka's special mind jutsus. She's a chunin like me and Sakura. The third member is Akamishi Chuji. He's my best friend, also a chunin. He possessed the Akamishi's body techniques. Shikamaru paused as he was about to mention Asuma-sensei. He bit his lip before continuing. Then there is Team Guy. Mido Guy is the sensei. He's Kakashi's rival. He's strongest at taijutsu, as is his favorite pupil Rock Lee, who is unable to use ninjutsu or genjutsu, but makes it up by his unbelievable taijutsu skills. The other two team members are Tenten, who is a weapon master, and Hyuga Niji, who has the Kekkai Genkai of the Hyuga clan, the Byakugan. That brings me to his cousin Hyuga Hinata. She also has the Byakugan. She is from the main branch family. However, Niji is, how to put it, a bit more skilled. Hinata is part of Team 8. Aside from her, there is Inuzuka Kiba, who is from a dog training family, and a brain Shino, whose family trains bugs as weapons. Their sensei is Kurenai. Shikamaru stopped, and finally took a deep breath, while Kei remained silent, trying to slowly let the package of information sink in. The thing that troubled him the most was that none of this information seemed even remotely familiar. He couldn't tie a face to a name, or remember his relationship with any of them. What surprised him, though, was that he understood a lot of the information, or in some form knew them. He knew what a Byakugan was. He even knew what a Kekkai Genkai was. He knew there were ninjas that used bugs as weapons. Sayuri, on the other hand, was unable to follow the conversation, and chose to remain silent. After a few more minutes of silence, Shikamaru stopped. Well, I have an errand to run now, so I can't chat any longer, but if you ever need anything, or want to ask about something, don't hesitate to ask, he said with a smile, putting his hands in his pockets, and taking a few steps back. Kei smiled and nodded politely, not pointing out the fact that he has no way to contact this polite stranger friend, given that he doesn't know his house. Ja eni. See, as Shikamaru saluted the two, before jumping onto the rooftops in a blink of an eye. Kei and Sayuri stayed in their place for a few more moments. You have no idea how to get back, do you? Sayuri said, a soft smile forming on her lips. Nope. The two continued wandering through the busy streets of Konohagakure, not knowing where they were heading. Not really caring, though. Hey Naruto. Naruto. The voice called again, causing Kei to remember that that was his name. He turned around to see a brown-haired girl, holding two large scrolls. Of course she's expecting me to recognize her, Kei thought to himself, waiting in his place, and drawing a faint smile on his face. The girl hurried over. Oh yeah, you probably have no idea who I am. My name is Tenten. We met at the village gate the other day, she said with a gentle smile. Yeah, Kei muttered, nodding slightly with a smile, as he tried to remember what Shikamaru told him about this girl. What are you doing on this side of the village? Your apartment is in the opposite direction, the weapon master said, then giggled lightly. The other two couldn't help but smile at the joyful girl. I was just buying some weapons from the store. If you want, I could walk you home, Tenten offered, pointing in a direction. Kei shrugged and started walking, signaling for Sayuri to do the same. The three teenagers walked side by side, following the brunette's lead. Your name is Sayuri, right? Tenten said, creasing her forehead. Sayuri nodded slowly, her eyes aimed at the ground. Where do you live? The brown-eyed girl asked. At the far end of Kuroro Forest, Sayuri answered hesitantly. But that whole area is detached from the rest of the world. You must have been so lonely, the girl said. Sayuri didn't answer as her face slowly reddened. Oh, here we are, Tenten suddenly said with a friendly smile. Your apartment is number 9. I think, she added. Not a fact, I chose a random number. Naruto turned his eyes to the large, old-looking apartment building, a weird feeling stirring in his chest. Kei-san, he heard a soft voice say, as a sudden warmth filled his hand. He looked down at his hand that was gently squeezed by a smaller hand. He turned his eyes to Sayuri's face, and his features relaxed. Oyasumi nasai, good night, Tenten suddenly said as she left. The other two teens turned around slightly and watched her go, then headed towards the entrance of the old building. In the apartment, Sayuri sat on the bed teasing Bobo with a small orange rubber ball. Kei sat to a side watching them with a calm smile. So, what do you think so far? Sayuri said, addressing Kei, although she kept her eyes on her dog. About what? Kei answered, doing the same. Well, about everything. Konoha, your old friends, your old apartment, your old life. Kei remained silent for a few minutes, forming his answer. Well, Konoha is bigger than I thought it would be. Very crowded compared to what I got used to living with you, but I do like being around a lot of people," he said, then paused. "My old friends seem to be nice people, although I don't know much about them, or what my relationship with them used to be. My apartment is old and too small, but I guess it used to be enough for me, since I used to live alone. It was practical and good to sleep in, I guess." "And?" Sayuri said, looking at his tanned face. "And what?" He answered her with a question, as he usually does. "You didn't say what you thought of your old life," Sayuri pressed, with a gentle smile on her round face. Kei took a deep breath. "Well, I guess that's because I don't know much about my old life," he answered, continuing to watch Bobo play. Sayuri stared at him with a concerned look in her eyes. For some reason Kei seemed uncharacteristically sad, as if something was bothering him. "And I-san, are you alright?" she asked cautiously. Kei looked up at her, a surprised look in his honest blue eyes. Sayuri squirmed. What? What is it?" she asked. "And nothing," Kei answered, quickly looking away. "No. It's not nothing," she said, pursing her lips, as she felt a burning sensation in her cheeks. "Since when did you start hiding your thoughts from me?" "Well, it's nothing, really," Kei said, and would have left it at that, except that the look on the girl's face said that he should do otherwise. "It's just that it's the first time you called me an I-san since we came to Konoha." "Oh," she hummed, realizing that what he just said was true. Kei noticed the sudden heavy atmosphere that loomed in the room. "It's nothing. I don't mind, everybody is not themselves these days. So don't worry about." Sayuri smiled slightly at her good friend's attempt to make her feel better, but she knew that something had changed between them two ever since they came to this place. She sighed slightly, as she turned around to look out of the window at the star-filled summer night. Somehow, it too seemed to look different. "Knock knock. 1 second, I'll be right there," a cheerful voice called down. A few seconds later Ino was swinging the door open, an attractive smile pasted on her slender face. "Oh, Sakura," she snorted, a challenging smile forming on her lips. "Can I come in, Ino?" Sakura said anxiously, not noticing Ino's expressions. Sure. Come in. Is something wrong?" Ino quickly answered, letting her friend in with concern. She led the pale girl into the living room, and sat her on the black leather couch, then hurried off. A few minutes later she came back with 2 pink cups of strawberry tea, and set them on the glass coffee table. "What's wrong?" she asked, jumping onto the couch and curling up next to her best friend. Sakura clenched her fists on her knees, fighting back the tears locked in her eyes. The blonde stared at her, not knowing what to say. She had never seen Sakura seem so vulnerable before. She definitely hadn't come to Ino for help before. "I just don't know what to do," Sakura finally spoke in a choked, whisperish voice. Ino stared at her quietly, not knowing what her friend was talking about. "It's Naruto," Sakura added, as if she could hear Ino's thoughts. "What's wrong?" Ino said in a comforting voice. "I feel so helpless," she whispered. Again, she added in a voice only she heard. "Why doesn't he want to remember?" Sakura snapped, tears running freely from her emerald eyes. Ino stared at her cautiously. "It's not his fault he lost his memory," she said, her voice only a bit higher than a whisper. The pink-haired Konichi shook her head violently. "Both me and Tsunade-sama are medical ninjas, and we couldn't find any physical cause for his memory loss." Sakura stopped to take a breath, but then quickly added, not giving Ino a chance to speak. "It's like he doesn't want to remember us, he doesn't want to remember his old life." A faint sad smile appeared on her lips as she added, "And who could blame him?" She paused as if trying to control her emotions. "But it hurts." She suddenly burst into tears once more. "He doesn't know us. We're the ones who are hurting. We have to watch him not remember us. I have to see him and know he doesn't remember who I am to him. And who he is to me." Ino paused for a moment, thinking it over slowly. Sakura remained quiet, her tears continuing to silently flow down her cheeks and drop on her folded hands. Did Tsunade-sama say that to you?" Ino suddenly said. Sakura lifted her teary eyes, a confused look imprinted in them. "Did Tsunade-sama say that Naruto doesn't want to remember?" Ino explained. "No," Sakura said in a low voice, returning her gaze to the soft carpet. "But somehow I'm sure. I'm not making this up," she added, her voice sounding a bit more collected than a few minutes ago. The blonde stared at her pink-headed friend, thinking it over. Sakura, you're wrong, she said, making Sakura turn around and stare. All there is that Naruto needs us now more than ever. We have to help him remember. Sakura paused for a second, her eyes aimed at her feet. You're right, Sakura said, standing up, a sheepish, sad smile on her lips. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bother you at such a late hour, for my silly fears, she said. Ino stood up, staring at her best friend's face with concern. Don't mention it, Ino said with a smile. I kinda miss you, she added in a voice she was only meant to hear. But Sakura heard it. She looked at the girl across from her, a blank look on her face. See you later, pig, Sakura said, a mischievous smile forming on her face. Don't forget to polish your forehead, crybaby. Ino returned the compliment. Sakura just smiled and headed to the door. Arigato, Ino, she whispered, gently pulling the door close. /N. I only meant for this chapter to be 2,500 words, but I decided that this Sakurino Sector F. It better in this chapter, so it ended up being over 3,000 words. I also want to apologize for the extensive description of the Naruto characters that you already know, but I was just putting myself in Kei's shoes and decided he needed to learn about his friends. I know I made Shikamaru seem like an extremely passive person, but sometimes he is. And I think a shy person like Sayuri would find him intimidating. I just hope he wasn't too OOC. Please review. Chapter 6. /N. More and more reviews. I'm so happy, _W_. Thanks to Thought, and the person with the very long name for the anonymous reviews. Thought, no, Naruto still hasn't been informed that he has the QB inside of him. This chapter makes it clear, and thanks for the suggestion, but the story is already finished in my computer, including the ending, but I'm glad you're enjoying the story enough to participate. ATCNHBT, thanks for the review. It's sorta a narrow XOC, but mostly it's a friendship. Read on more and you'll understand. As for the personality change, that's just how I imagine Naruto would be if he wasn't so hyperactive and rash. A friend in demand. AK. Choices. It had been a week since Naruto's miraculous return. All the teen ninjas had visited him at least twice. All telling different stories, the ones they remembered the most. Kei and Sayuri had just left the apartment building a little before sunset. Naruto and I-san! They heard a younger voice call. The two turned around to see three teens, about 12 years old, standing in the middle of the constant moving crowds. The middle boy was smiling widely. Kanabanwa. Naruto-nisan. Good evening, said when meeting someone. Naruto and Sayuri flashed a smile, exchanging an understanding look between the two of them. The boy was looking at the blonde in anticipation, as did the other two teens that stood next to him. Hello, I'm Sayuri, Sayuri suddenly said, glancing over at Kei. Oh Gomen, I'm Konohamaru. This is Mugi, and that's Adon, the boy with the long blue scarf said, pointing at his two friends in the order they were mentioned. Sayuri nodded politely, and Kei gave her a gratefully smile. Well, Nanhamaru. You do know that I have a memory loss, right? Kei said calmly. The three kids' eyes widened with remembrance and horror. That's right. Ebiso Sensei told us, the orange-haired girl said. Konohamaru looked away thoughtfully. How can I make you remember? He murmured to himself, as his two friends joined in their thinking position. Kei and Sayuri exchanged laughing looks. Aha! Nanhamaru hummed excitedly. This technique will bring back your memory in no time, Naruto-nisan. Don't you worry. The boy then exchanged serious looks with the other two, then nodded. You taught us this technique, Konohamaru added. Okay. Harm no jutsu, the three yelled simultaneously. Poof. Eep. Sayuri gasped, turning away with a crimson-colored face, while Naruto's nose began bleeding uncontrollably and fell on his back. Poof. And Naruto-nisan? Mugi stuttered cautiously, staring at their mentor. Do you think it worked? Adon asked, followed by a short sniffle. Sayuri helped the blonde boy back to his feet, as she put a handkerchief on his nose. Her eyebrow twitched slightly. Konohamaru. Please do not do that technique anymore. She then shot Kei a furious glare. Kei. They said that you taught them that technique. Yeah. I don't remember any of it. Honest. He stuttered, waving his hands. I can't believe you were such a pervert. Kei, Sayuri mumbled to herself. Now, if you three don't mind, Naruto. And I have somewhere to go. She added to the kids in a sweet voice masking great anger. The three hummed excitedly in agreement. See you later. Naruto-nissen! Konohamaru yelled as he waved goodbye. Oof! Kei gasped after receiving a jab in the side by Sayuro's elbow. Try to remember that when you regain your memory, she huffed. Don't make me remind you, she added threateningly. All Kei could do was nod in response, a nervous smile on his lips. They arrived home late that night. No, they weren't partying, but they still had trouble finding their own way around the village. Sayuri climbed under the covers and Kei set a sleeping bag as they would do every night. They remained silent for some time, their steady breathing being the only heard sound. Kei? Sayuri said, trying to keep her voice close to a whisper. What do you think is going to happen next? She asked, her voice containing a weird tone. There was a low ruffle as Kei flipped over to look at Sayuri's silhouette in the moonlight. What do you mean? He asked, a concerned look was unseen on his face. I mean, what if you never regain your memory? Then what will you do? She asked, but he remained silent. I mean, are we going to stay in Konoha? Or are we going back to the cabin? She said, trying to make it easier for him to answer. But he still didn't answer. At that moment Bobo jumped onto the bed and lay in front of Sayuri. She smiled to mask what she was feeling and petted him on the back gently. I don't know. Kei's voice surprisingly came with an answer. The silence suddenly became eerie, as an odd atmosphere took over. Let's just go to sleep, Sayuri said quickly. Good night, Kei, she added, flipping over to face the wall. Kei remained silent for a second but then sighed, as he too flipped to face the other wall. Good night, he answered. Sayuri woke up before the sun had come up. She sighed, rolling over, and tried to fall back asleep, but with no use. She let out an exasperated sigh as she sat up. She looked over, but Kei wasn't sleeping on the ground. She knotted her brows, but figured that she wouldn't be able to find him. She dangled her legs off the side of the bed, looking at Bobo as he slept in Kei's place, as if he was keeping it warm for his friend. Not knowing what to do with herself, Sayuri decided to go to the roof for fresh air. Kei? He heard Sayuri's voice call from behind. He turned around slowly, and watched her as she walked over to him. It's chilly up here. She smiled faintly, as she tightened her light peach sweater over her pajamas. He only responded with a slight smile. Aren't you afraid to fall? Sayuri asked, smiling, as she leaned on the ledge he was sitting on. He shook his head. Nah. I bet I did more frightening things as a ninja. The brown-haired girl let out a short giggle. I bet you did, she said. So, what are you doing up here? She asked, a bit more serious, watching the horizon as she waited for sunrise. The same as you, he answered. There was a brief moment of silence as the early morning breeze tickled their faces. Kei, you noticed it too, right? Kei interrupted her, a sad smile on his lips. You noticed how the villagers look at me, he explained as he saw her questioning look. Kei, that doesn't. Only God knows what I did to make them hate me so much. Kei interrupted for the second time. Kei, it's all just one whole big mystery, my whole life. I've learned so much about my life. But it's like I don't know anything at all, he interrupted for the third time. They, meaning the other ninjas, tell me anything. Except what's important, he added, irritated, to say the least. Sayuri remained silent this time, knowing that what he was saying was true. He could sense what she was feeling, so he continued gazing ahead with his brows knotted. And you know what the worst part is? He added without needing to interrupt her. I feel as if I don't want to know. What if I can't take it? What if I don't like who I actually am? He continued, gritting his teeth hopelessly, as he slammed his fist on the concrete under him. You are a good person, Sayuri said, her warm hand gently wrapping around his. He looked at her surprised for a moment, then turned away, a saddened look in his blue eyes. But how can you know? He asked, not making eye contact. Because this is who you are, kind, friendly, fun Kei, she answered with a playful smile, squeezing his hand tightly. But who said that's who I am actually? I don't know how to put it, but this is you, this is who your default personality is, she answered, turning to watch the first of the daylight. People like you don't just come out of thin air. XD, she added, her smile seemingly brighter. Kei stared at her, unsure of what to believe. He really wanted to believe what Sayuri was saying, however. He couldn't shake off the feeling that he was nothing but evil inside. There was an unreasonable empty feeling in his heart that would have come from somewhere. But the blonde forced out a pale, encouraging smile to try and put Sayuri at ease. She settled for what she got. She pushed herself away from the edge. "You coming?" she asked, then let out a long, tired yawn. The blue-eyed boy gave her a sympathetic smile as he said, "You go, I'll catch up." Sayuri yawned again. "Right. Okay. I guess I'll just wait," she said, but felt too lazy to finish her sentence, as she slowly slumped down the stairs. She failed to see how the blonde's smile faded away. She stumbled into the apartment, her eyelids seeming unusually heavy. She glanced over at Bobo as he slept, and she sat on the bed. "If I wait for him here, it can't hurt," she thought to herself. "Well, if I just lean my head while I wait for him, it would be okay. He wouldn't mind if I just closed my eyes for a second. It couldn't hurt to." "Sayuri. Sayuri? I'm going out with Sakura-san, okay?" "Uh-huh. Okay. See you later." Again she woke up to find an empty room. Kei has been acting odd for these last few days. She sighed. She has to share Kei now. That is just a fact she has to learn to live with. She sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the wooden floor with sleepy eyes. Finally she stretched and yawned, trying to collect her energy, then let her arms drop down beside her lazily. She stood up, noticing that her dog was nowhere to be found. She quickly shrugged, standing up and deciding that Bobo was with Kei. In a few minutes she realized that she was hungry. She headed to the small fridge, then frowned when she found no edible food in it. She slammed the door shut with a sigh, deciding to go buy some fresh food and more dog food for Bobo. She turned to her pack. Fumbling through it, she found, in horror, that their money supply was running low. She quickly embedded the money in her pocket, wondering to herself how they would manage to make more money. Kei probably used to make money being a ninja, but since he can't do that anymore, they'll have to learn to do something else for a living. She thought most of that as she skipped down the many stairs leading out into the street. As she stared at the crowded road, she decided to take the back street where there would be less people. And without second thought, she turned into the alley that was beside the large blue apartment building. She walked through it, her mind absent in thought, until she found herself somewhere she didn't know. She found a little restaurant. She decided to go in and ask for directions. She entered the crowded place looking for someone willing to volunteer with some information for her. She tried asking some waiters, but no one seemed to have a second to spare. She stood there a bit puffed, and not to mention confused, wondering what to do next. "Excuse me," Sayuri heard a soft voice from behind. "You said you were looking for a store that sold dog food?" Sayuri turned around to see a lady with red eyes and silky black hair. Next to her sat a toddler with tanned skin and short black hair. She nodded, hopefully waiting for the women to help her. The women put the vegetable-bearing chopsticks in the child's mouth, then answered, "If you want, I can direct you to the Inuzuka family store. They can give you the best food for your dog." Sayuri nodded happily, wondering in the back of her mind where she had heard that name before. The lady quickly gave her clear directions. "That should take you straight to the place," she concluded. Sayuri smiled brightly. "Arigato," she said, with a polite nod. "By the way, he's cute," she said, motioning at the child. "I'm guessing he takes after his father," she added as the toddler stared at her with wide brown eyes and smile. The mother smiled kindly. "Ah," she answered briefly. The teen waved playfully at the two as she left the restaurant. Surprisingly, it only took a few minutes for her to reach the mentioned place. She approached the building, unsure of what to do next. "Hey, what can I do for you?" "Eep," she gasped, turning around to see the brown-haired boy who suddenly appeared behind her. "Oh, sorry for startling you," he said with a toothy smile, patting his small lion-sized dog. Sayuri stared at the friendly large dog for a short moment, then said, pasting a smile on her lips, It's alright. Do you know where the Inuzuka pet utilities are?" "Hey. Yeah, you're that girl that was with Naruto, right?" He paused, thinking. "Sayuri," she reminded him, barely able to maintain her smile. "Yeah, that's right, Sayuri. I'm Inuzuka Kiba. This fella is Akamaru." He smiled widely, extending a hand. She shook his hand shyly, smiling slightly as the dog wagged his tail and barked. "What did you say you needed?" Kiba asked, leaning against Akamaru a little. "Just some dog food for Bobo," she said, fidgeting a little. "That's it. No problem. Follow me," he said, taking the lead. Sayuri followed him timidly as he burst through the front door of a large white building. "Nei-chan?" he called livelily, leading Sayuri deeper into the residential section of the building. She heard a woman's voice answer with incomprehensible words. Apparently Kiba understood them and yelled back. "Yeah, I did. They'll be ready by 5 tomorrow." He then turned to Sayuri and chuckled a bit. "What are you so nervous about? We don't bite." Sayuri smiled at his comment and continued following him towards the back of the house. The brown-haired boy fumbled through bags of pet food. Sayuri stood to the side watching quietly. "Nei-chan? Where is the energy dog food?" he yelled out. There was another muffled answer. Kiba's face lightened after it. "You really don't need to give me that, just any regular dog food would do," Sayuri murmured, as she watched the boy climb to a higher shelf. "Nonsense! You are a friend of Naruto, and so mine too," he answered, trying to reach the far end of the shelf. "Aha! There it is," he said, jumping backwards and landing on his feet. He walked over to Sayuri, a big grin on his tanned face. He carefully handed her the large bright green package. She took it from him with a grateful nod. He walked her back out to the street. "Ha, you're pretty strong for a girl," he said, smiling widely. She looked over at him confused. "That bag is pretty heavy. I didn't actually expect you to be able to hold it," he said with a sheepish smile, realizing he wasn't acting very gentlemanlike. I mean, in letting her hold a heavy bag. But Sayuri just smiled lightly as she said, "Nah, it's okay. I carry heavier things back at the cabin." The wildish-looking boy stared at her curiously, wanting her to explain, but she didn't. Instead she said, "Well, thanks a lot, Kiba-san. I'll try to pay this back to you," she said with a bright smile, taking a few steps. "Nah, don't mention it." "Hey, should I walk you back?" he said, hesitant to step towards her. She hummed, expressing her refuse. "I still need to do a little more shopping." "But are you sure you can find your way back?" he asked, raising his brows. "I'll manage," she said, accompanied with a small giggle. "Sayonara, Kiba-san." Sayonara is actually Japanese for goodbye, I think. Kiba waved back as she walked away. Sayuri reverted her steps, safely guiding herself back to the restaurant. She saw the street that would lead her straight back to Kei's apartment. She turned her gaze back to the sky. It was still too early to go back and be stuck in the apartment. With that decided, she turned around, walking in a random direction. She wandered through the ninja-filled streets. Almost everyone in Konoha was a ninja, it seemed. I wonder if the babies are ninjas too. She snickered to herself. At that moment, a few young children were mimicking ninja actions playfully. The timing of that just seemed too funny for her. She let out a loud giggle, causing everyone to turn to her and stare. She blushed heavily, shrinking between her shoulders slightly. She wished Kei was there so that she could hide behind his arm. With her hurried steps, she was able to get away fairly fast. She found that she had wandered towards a large school. It took her a few moments to realize that it was a ninja school. She stood next to a swing tied to a large tree. She leaned against the tree as she calmly watched the children play and train. She let out a slight sigh as she felt a sudden cloud of loneliness swarm her heart. She shook her head, then looked briefly at her bags of groceries. The fruit she bought won't last very long. But if she bought any more, they'd rot in the fridge before she could finish them. She sighed again as she sat against the tree and leaned her head on the tree trunk, closing her eyes. She thought back to her cabin, and the beautiful forest surrounding it. She wished she could be there at that moment, walking barefoot in the wet grass, and touching the exotic flowers that only grow there. But not the aurora flower, that one smelled awful. She giggled to herself as her body relaxed further. She kept her mind on the forest, forgetting herself. "Sayuri. I'm sorry, Kei said as he opened the door to his apartment. He knotted his brows when she was nowhere to be seen, but he quickly shrugged it off. It was noon already. He couldn't seriously expect Sayuri to just sit around and do nothing all day. He let Bobo jump around the room hyperly, as he headed to take a shower. He came out, his blonde hair sticking to his forehead, and the great refreshment filling him, the refreshment that only comes from a cold shower on a hot summer day. He looked out the window. It was still high noon. Sayuri would be coming back soon. He sat on the bed, looking around at the bare room. He couldn't find something entertaining to do. He searched in the drawers for something to read. He only found a cooking magazine that dated 15 years back. He assumed that it had originally came with the apartment. He got up to pour water for Bobo in his shiny blue plastic plate, then went back and lay on the bed facing the ceiling. He flipped to his side, deciding to take a short nap until Sayuri came home. He hadn't fallen asleep since the morning. He was too tired to even bother to cover himself. /N. Yeah, well, this chapter was sort of a filler, more action in the next one, I think. Sorry about the bit with Kurenai, no real spoilers there, not that I know of anyways. I know that the boy doesn't fit correctly into the time frame that I'm typing this story in, but I just had to throw it in. Also, I'm sorry that most of this chapter turned out about Sayuri, rather than the actual lead character Naruto. That was unintentional. Chapter 7. /N. All the support I'm getting is greatly appreciated. Oh, and just so you know, the story is nearing its end quickly. Please enjoy. A friend in demand. A.K. Choices. Naruto woke up later, feeling sluggish, and wanting to go back to sleep. He flipped onto his stomach, deciding that there would be no harm in that. But was alerted as Bobo licked his hand as it dangled off the bed, letting out a low whimper. "What is it, buddy?" he asked lazily as he placed his hand on the dog's head. However, the dog grunted as he moved back and gave half a bark. It confused the teen, and caused him to wake up further. He sat up, noticing that the room was slightly dimmed. He turned to the window, and saw that the sun was nearly finished its journey towards the west. At that, he noticed that Sayuri wasn't in the room. He jumped out of bed, the dog slightly startled at the boy's sudden action. The teen, however, failed to notice that as he searched for any sign of the girl in the one-room department. But the room was untouched. It was clear that Sayuri hadn't come back since whenever she left. Without hesitation, the boy slipped on his going-out clothes and then his sandals. Storming out the door to find his friend, the brown dog quickly following after. Sayuri yawned broadly as she slowly woke. Her eyes suddenly shot open when she noticed that she had fallen asleep in the middle of nowhere. She looked at the sky. It wasn't yet sundown, but it would be soon. She stood up and stretched, looking around. There were no kids in the schoolyard where they were playing in earlier. Obviously, she thought to herself. She then remembered her bags of groceries. She turned with a sharp move to where she had left them. Surprisingly, they were exactly where she had left them. She quickly picked them, haphazardly arranging them all to fit in her arms. Sayuri then began her journey home, the one difficulty being in the direction that would be. The brunette shrugged it off, walking in a random direction. After about a half hour of wandering around in circles, she decided that it was about time to ask someone for directions, which was a difficult task in itself, given that she's not sure what to ask exactly. She looked around, noticing how the sun had traveled so far into the west. She then looked around, wondering why all the shops had started closing. Soon after, Sayuri had given up on finding an open store willing to offer her directions. She saw a narrow but long alley that led to what seemed to be a wide main street, where she would almost definitely be able to find her way back from. Without thinking twice, the girl adjusted her bags once more as she started walking through the alley. When she was about halfway through, she saw a thuggish-looking teenager pop out of a side street that she hadn't noticed. He stood near the 3/4 mark of the street, aiming a meaningful smirk in her direction. Sayuri hugged the bags closer to her chest, hiding her head behind them and between her shoulders. She tried to convince herself that he was no one, as she walked slightly faster. As she neared the boy, she prayed that nothing would happen. However, as she was just about to pass in front of him, he adjusted his placing so that he could block her way. "Konbanwa," he said while his smirk widened. "Good evening," said when meeting someone. Sayuri stopped, but didn't lift her head from behind her bags. "No, what's a pretty girl like yourself doing in a place like this?" he asked mockingly, making a slight hand gesture. Sayuri's heart was now pounding out of her chest, as she tried to force her brain to think of a plan. She began stepping back, her breathing quickened. The boy quickly grabbed hold of her wrist. She let out a frightened screech as her bag fell to the ground, a few glass items shattering with a chilling echo. The short-haired teenage girl pulled her wrist shakily, but was unable to free herself. The boy, though not too big, was oddly powerful and so even further threatening. "You're a feisty one, aren't you, Ononoko girl? I think," he whispered threateningly, his upper fangs slightly peeking out of his lips. Sayuri cowered back, but her arm remained in his grasp. He leaned towards her, extending his free hand in her direction. "Stay away from me!" she screamed, her hand automatically swinging into a slap. There was a heavy silence after the loud slap, both teenagers frozen momentarily, both not believing what had just happened. "How dare you!" the boy suddenly yelled viciously, swinging Sayuri violently. Sayuri screamed loudly as her foot slipped on the coarse ground, and she fell to her knees. The boy lifted her roughly from her wrist. Before she could regain her balance, the boy threw his fist, punching her in the upper cheek. He released her wrist, letting her fly back, then stumbled towards the alley wall. Sayuri pulled herself to her feet and glanced over at the exit nervously. The teenage boy saw that and smirked confidently. "You're not going anywhere, little girl," he said, cracking his knuckles as a meaningful gesture. Sayuri stared him in the eye, tears of fear streaming down her cheeks freely. The boy stepped in her direction. She ducked slightly, dashing in attempt to flee to the closed street. She managed to duck from under his open arms. But just as hope dared to near her heart, the boy whipped around expertly, grabbing her from the back of her dress and throwing her to the ground. Sayuri squeaked, trying to jump back to her feet and run away. Without a word, the boy kicked her on the side of the head. Sayuri fell to her side, pain coursing through her body. She felt her consciousness slip away from while her body went numb, slowly climbing towards her head. She knew that once this numbness reached her mind, she'd be under the mercy of the boy in front of her. The blonde quickly reached the street, the dog pacing around nervously. Kei lifted his worried eyes to the sky. It was only a few minutes until sundown, and he had no idea where to search. A/N. Sorry for jumping back and forth in time. He chose a random street and walked in it, unsure of where he wanted to go. Kei suddenly stopped, remembering the faithful dog that was with him. He crouched down next to the dog. "Bobo, fine Sayuri." As if the creature had understood what he was saying, he instantly lowered his snout to the ground, sniffing around anxiously. The blonde stood up, watching the dog as he searched for the scent of his master. They didn't seem to be anywhere near where she went. Kei then decided to go back to the apartment building, in hope that the dog could find what little scent may remain there. Bobo grunted and huffed as he searched the ground with his most powerful of the 5 senses. Naruto watched him nervously, as he was nowhere closer to finding his good friend. Finally, Bobo seemed to have found something to follow. He took off into the street neighboring the apartment building. With hurried steps, Kei followed the brown dog as it sniffed around. They reached a clearing, many closed shops everywhere. The road parted into 3 other roads. The dog hesitated for a second, torn between 2 paths. Kei watched nervously. With the slightest bark, the dog took off in a direction, seeming more and more confident as he followed the scent he caught. Bobo led the blonde to a large tree across from a ninja school. At that point, the teen couldn't tear his gaze off that school, feeling overwhelmingly lonely inside. His chest felt tight as his forehead creased with discomfort. That tripled, at least, when a wooden swing brushed against his hand. Memories had never felt so close than it did at that moment as he stared at the school. But somehow, he felt something holding those memories back. A dread that he couldn't control. He was pulled out of his chilling thoughts with a bark. He turned to see the dog circling himself, showing great uneasiness. He took a step towards the dog. Bobo then started walking towards Kei, then in a certain direction. The blonde failed to understand the obvious signal to follow the dog, and so it circled him twice, then began tugging at the boy's clothes. Finally, Naruto understood then what was wanted from him. He followed the dog as it hurried in one direction without hesitation, turning around and barking whenever the teen fell behind. Bobo led him to a long side street. Kei could see a figure near the end of the street, hovering over something on the ground. At that moment, Kei noticed that Bobo was growling and barking threateningly. Naruto knotted his brows tightly, an icy chill running down his spine. He then began running towards the end of the street. The figure quickly backed away from what he was inspecting, whipping around with a threatening glare. The teen found that the footsteps belonged to a teenager like himself, far less threatening than he first assumed. He stood in the blonde intruder's path, keeping his prey behind him. "Hey, get lost!" he yelled to the blonde, who was staring intensely at the prize laying behind him. It was Sayuri, his friend, his savior Sayuri. She was lying unconscious behind that teenager's legs. Her face was bruised, tears dried on her cheeks. He had failed her, he didn't defend her. He had left her alone in the apartment, and went frolicking around with that pink-haired ninja, and then he didn't bother to look for her all day. He had put her through hell getting her here. He insisted on dragging her away from the safety of her home, and practically threw her in the arms of danger. An uncontrollable feeling of pure rage and self-loathing filled the blonde, as an intense urge to kill welled in his chest. His chest heaved with fury, his vision blurry with tears of hatred, as he turned to the boy and glared. The boy immediately cowered back, letting out a fearful shriek. Demon monster! He screamed, pointing a trembling finger in Kei's direction. The blonde wondered what the boy meant, but not for long. With the boost of energy he felt travel through his muscles, he jumped towards the boy with an animal-like leap. He easily landed on the boy's torso, and then punched the boy under him in the face in both cheeks. He then jumped off him, pulling the teen from the collar, then flinging him away with enormous force. The black-haired teen was thrown out of the alley, and smashing into the across wall. Kei could feel his body tingling as he felt his abnormal power increase, and with it Inkria said the intolerable feeling of rage and strong instinct to rip the boy to shreds. Indeed, Kei leapt high into the air, and landed on top of the boy once more. The teen gasped as some blood escaped his lips. Screams spread through the now crowded street, as Kei pulled the other boy from the collar, punching him relentlessly. Sayuri quickly regained consciousness at a loud scream. It sounded so far away, as if she was listening to something happening in another dimension. She could hear footsteps beside her and muffled sounds, but her head was heavy, and her body numb. Her senses began returning to her quickly, with a tingling sensation in all her body. The brown-haired girl isolated herself from the world as she weakly tried to regain her control over her many limbs. As she regained feeling of her body, with it came the pain from her many bruises. She looked up to see someone who looked like Kei jumping away with impossible strength. She rubbed her eyes so that the blurriness would disappear. Sayuri forced herself to her feet, weakly staring towards the end of the street. Her brows knotted tightly, when she saw a boy that looked like Kei slam the other boy against the wall, and beat him mercilessly. Sayuri stared shocked, as her brain slowly registered the red halo around the blonde teenager. The girl's legs moved on their own will, quickly taking her towards the boy she was now sure was her friend. Kei! Stop it! He heard a familiar voice call from behind. But it was too soon to stop. This boy hadn't learned his lesson yet. Kei, please! Stop! His brain was slowly registering the voice. It was a friend. It was Sayuri. Sayuri? The blonde whispered, turning around in shock. Stop. Just stop! The girl cried, grasping her neck and collar shakily, unsure of what to do with herself. The red-eyed boy turned to stare in shock at the bloody boy in his hand. His grip weakened, and he released the boy's collar. The unconscious boy fell to the ground with a thump. He heard whispers spread through the people around him. Terrible monster. He should be locked away. The poor boy. He nearly killed him. Demon boy. Suddenly he heard Sakura's voice, calling him and saying something. Kei turned around, to see the pink-haired ninja jumping towards them. She stood next to Sayuri, staring at him nervously. Sayuri. Sayuri, Naruto said guiltily, extending his hand towards his brown-haired friend. The girl let out a feared shriek, backing away from his clawed hands and bloody red eyes, and hid her face in the pink-haired girl's hug. Sakura stared at him, unsure of what to think. Bobo jumped to his master's aid, barking ferociously and baring his teeth at Kei, in wild fear. He pulled his hand back before his face, staring at the red-colored energy surrounding his body. What's happening to me? He mumbled to himself, pulling his clawed hand to his chest. His brows creased, and his eyes teared on the verge of spilling. He stared at the crying Sayuri, as Sakura stroked her back and hair comfortingly. Naruto! He heard a voice gasp. His anger had subsided. As the Shikamura boy approached him cautiously, he touched the blonde on the shoulder gently. Naruto? He repeated, this time his tone much calmer. His eyes were now back to their normal blue color. He turned towards the slightly taller boy, speechless. Let's go, Shikamura said, exchanging a quick look with Sakura. The emerald-eyed Koniochi just stared at the black-haired Chunin, who gave her a confident nod. Come on, Shikamura said, pulling the blonde slightly from the shoulder. Kei turned to give Sayuri one last guilt-filled glance. Hi, he whispered weakly. /N. So that's what I imagined would happen if Naruto went Kyuubi before he regained his lost memory. I don't know how Naruto feels when he's in Kyuubi mode, but I tried to describe it as best as I could. Hope you liked it. Oh, and the Rouge Teen isn't a vampire, obviously. I just imagined that he'd have a fongy smile, like Kiba. So don't forget to review. W. Chapter 8. /N. Sorry it took so long for me to post this chapter. You see, I had lost the rest of the story, nearly 7,000 words. All attempts to rescue the file failed, so I just thought I'd post this chapter before rewriting the ending. A friend in demand. aka choices. Here, Sakura said with a sympathetic smile, setting a cup of cocoa in front of the brown-haired girl. Sayuri merely glanced at the white cup before turning her eyes to the ground. What was that? She asked. Sakura froze momentarily, knowing that Sayuri was talking about their blonde friend. She then sighed, taking a seat on another couch. It's a long story. Sakura hummed thoughtfully, staring up at the ceiling. Sayuri turned tired eyes towards the pink-haired medic, who instantly got the message, and so sighed again. I've got time, Sayuri said determinedly, reinforcing her point. That caused Sakura to sigh for the third time, as she chose her words carefully. You see, Naruto is... Shikamaru led the blonde back to his apartment. Kei walked in, his head hanging low, and sat on the bed. Shikamaru glanced at the boy sitting in the dark, before extending a hand and switching on the light. The one light bulb brought only faint light to the apartment, only able to cause the darkness to part slightly. But a slightly lighted room couldn't help the darkness in the blonde's heart disappear. The ingenious shinobi chose to lean against the wall opposite of the bed, waiting silently for the blonde to speak first. Utter silence lasted for some time until finally Kei found it in himself to talk. Who am I? Really? The high-IQ'd boy stepped towards his friend, pausing for a moment before settling next to him. You are Uzumaki Naruto, a genin from the village of Konoha. Part of Team 7-inch. He started. You were lost in an A-ranked mission while searching for a criminal in a forest. Naruto turned an impatient gaze towards the black-haired boy, who calmly continued. You are also the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. This time the blonde seemed more interested, however the terms the shinobi used was foreign to him. He aimed a questioning stare to the Chunin who sighed. The Kyuubi is a legendary monster, who ran havoc through the 5 nations. The teen paused, slowly reviewing history in his mind. After destroying much of the nation, there was only one way left to save what few people remained. The Kyuubi was sealed by the 4th Hokage and a child, roughly 16 years ago. He glanced at the wide-eyed blonde. And that child was you. Although Kei had already guessed that, it was completely different hearing it out loud. His breathing quickened, and his heartbeats became disordered. Then. Before. The blonde said, but was unable to finish due to his uneasy breathing. Yes. Shikamaru answered assertively. That was the Kyuubi chakra seeping out of your body. Tears filled the blonde's eyes. But. I didn't mean to hurt that boy so bad. But Sayuri. She was, and he... Naruto was unable to finish his sentences, as an overwhelming guilt came over him. Shikamaru stared at him silently, reviewing the data he had leisurely. I believe you, he suddenly said, causing Naruto to turn and stare. You had started to come to grips in controlling the demonic chakra before you lost your memory. But since you didn't know about what lay inside of you, you could no longer contain it. Kei stared at him silently, trying to decipher the boy's words. Shikamaru bit his bottom lip angrily. It was our fault for not telling you, he said thoughtfully. I'm sorry, Naruto. I should have came forward to you with your past. But you have to understand how this is delicate information. And since you were no longer a ninja, you couldn't trust me. Kei interrupted sternly, as his voice regained its steadiness, sounding more like his old self. That caught Shikamaru's attention, causing him to stare at his childhood friend for a few brief moments. Ah, he answered straightforwardly. The blonde teen turned his blue eyes to the ground in thought, his brows creased for a few minutes. He then turned stern eyes towards this friend/stranger. What else is there that I should know about myself? He asked, keeping his eyes locked on the boy in front of him. Shikamaru leaned back, lifting his gray-brown eyes to the ceiling. He let out a long sigh for a few seconds thoughtfully, while Kei remained silent waiting for his answer. The black-haired boy then pushed himself forward, leaning on his knees with his forearms. Well, naturally, since the villagers knew you had the Kyuubi inside of you, they hated and feared you. You were an orphan your whole life. You were alone most of your childhood. You only really started to gain confidence after you joined Team 7. Shikamaru paused, gazing at his former friend cautiously. The third member in your team was Uchiha Sasuke. The black-haired teen paused once more, watching the reaction the other teen upon hearing the name of his former rival. However, he had none. Sasuke was a troubled boy. His entire clan was murdered by his older brother, he told Kei. I didn't really have much to do with him. However, you had something like a rivalry and brotherhood relationship with him. Kei's brows started curling upward slightly. Every word Shikamaru would tell him would have a deep effect on him, as if he could feel the emotions that were attached to these forgotten memories. However, at the same time they didn't seem the least bit familiar to him. Sasuke left the village nearly 3 years ago, Shikamaru told the teen, after a short silence. You went to train almost immediately after his departure, and your failure to catch him. You came back not too long ago, and had another encounter with him, Shikamaru said, studying every reaction his blonde friend M. Ade. You also failed to bring him back this time too, Shikamaru said his final thought. Kei remained quiet for some time, trying to force himself to remember anything this boy was talking about. But it was no use, he was simply unable to remember. He turned his tormented eyes towards Shikamaru. I just can't remember any of this, he said in a cracked voice. Shikamaru stared back at him, thoughtfully. I can't blame you, he finally said, followed by an exasperated sigh. Kei clenched his fists, staring at the ground in deep thought. So what's going to happen to me next? Kei asked with a stern look. Shikamaru turned to him, a blank look on his face. I am no longer a ninja. I have no memory of my previous self. Kei paused to take a breath. I am obviously not just any ordinary person that could just be left alone, and what I did will not go unnoticed. There will probably be consequences. I will probably be deemed dangerous. The black-haired teen raised a brow, staring at his friend in thought. Everything he said was probably true. He was speaking like he understood what he was talking about. Shikamaru hummed in thought. But I'll try to do what I can, he added, standing up and stretched. Kei watched him silently as he walked to the door. Ja-ni, he said, turning around slightly. Kei made no move in response. Shikamaru slipped through the door, but before he left he turned around one last time saying, Naruto, I really am sorry. Click. The blonde sighed, turning his gaze to the ground once more. Enough is enough, Tsunade, the elder woman said, her voice only mildly losing its smoothness. Tsunade gritted her teeth slightly. How dare you ask me to lock away Naruto like he is just some beast? The blonde woman shouted, unable to contain her anger. He has gone too far this time, Tsunade, the elder man said in a stern voice. The fifth Hokage turned to him. It isn't his fault, she said, almost waving her fist in his face. Maybe so, Kohara said in her demanding voice. But he has proven to us once and for all that he is too dangerous to roam freely in the streets. Tsunade turned to her with a sharp turn, scarcely compressing a glare inside. And when Tsunade stayed silent, Kohara said, We've already made our minds. We are putting the Jinchuriki on house arrest until further notice. Her tone held clear content. With that said, the women turned away, walking to the door, Hamura following silently after. The door slammed shut, leaving a fuming Tsunade inside. Tsunade, chalked on her anger, was unable to make a sound. She kept her face aimed at the ground, her blonde bangs covering her eyes. The council hag's words ringing in her memory. She wasn't able to do anything for Naruto. This is when he needed her the most, and she was unable to help him the least bit. The poor boy doesn't understand what's happening to him, and now he's being locked away like some kind of monster. Damn it! She whispered, crushing the pen in her right hand. Shizen pressed her ear against the oak door. I can't hear anything, she huffed to herself, concentrating harder. The two members of the council had left nearly 10 minutes ago, and she didn't hear Tsunade make a sound since. Lost in her thoughts, Shizen failed to hear her mentor's footsteps walking over to the door. She didn't notice anything until it was too late. Ahi! The black-haired woman gasped, nearly falling onto Tsunade, who had suddenly swung the door open. However, Tsunade paid her no notice, simply walking around her frightened right-hand assistant. Shizen quickly snapped up, turning to give the Gaudame a concerned stare. Tsunade, her brows furrowed, walked down the long carpeted hall of the Hokage mansion, her angered footsteps not even close to showing the boiling volcanoes of anger she felt inside. Hokage-sama? She heard a voice say, a surprised tone in the boy's voice. Tsunade was about to ignore the boy and continue back to her office. However, she quickly decided not to. Turning to face the smart shinobi, Shikamaru, she said lowly, acknowledging his existence. The black-haired teen hesitated for one moment. I heard that the council was here for what happened with Naruto. Is that true? He asked cautiously. Tsunade nodded slightly, her throat feeling too tight to speak. What happened? The boy asked, concerned, with uncharacteristic hesitation. Tsunade let out a fiery sigh. They decided to put Naruto on house arrest. For now, she told Shikamaru, a hurtful tone being undetected in her voice. Shikamaru's eyes widened slightly. He quickly removed that expression from his face, trying to think of something to say. Tsunade, however, didn't wait. She simply walked away from the boy. /N. I hope you liked the chapter. I'm not sure if there were any lost scenes at the end of it. I won't be posting the next chapter until I'm completely finished typing the rest of this story. It's not too bad, about 7,000 words. Hopefully it won't take too long. I'm not sure if I got the council members' names right. So just review, and share your thoughts, and hopefully I'll be back with the next chapter soon. Chapter 9. /N. Just a really short chapter to get out of the way. I know it isn't much, but it's what I've retyped so far. My apologies. A friend in demand. AK. Choices. It's been 3 days. Sayuri thought. 3 days since she's seen K. She sat on the edge of the bed, in the apartment the Konoha officials had rented out for her. She looked around the bare room, her eyes stopping on Bobo for a second before filling with tears. She can't stand being alone, not again, not after him. The tears flew down her cheeks freely upon thinking of K. She still trembles when she remembers the other night. She was so frightened. That evil red energy, the animal-like claws and fangs, the blood-red eyes. It was such a monster. The brown-haired girl froze momentarily, realizing how she felt for the first time. This was K she was talking about, her good friend K. More tears poured on her cheek and down her chin. As she threw herself onto the pillow, wetting it with her tears. She's so afraid of the one person she wishes could comfort her right now. Bobo let out a low whimper, nudging her slightly with his nose. But she didn't notice, as she hid her head deeper into pillow, letting out a tormented cry. If she's so afraid, then why? Why does her heart ache so much? She didn't care what anyone might say as her cries grew louder and louder and louder. It's been 3 days since he heard from Sayuri. He didn't blame her at all. But what was he supposed to do? He replayed the scenario time after time in his head. It tortured him. Why him? Out of all the people he could be, why does he have to be this monster? Kei shook his head violently, trying to get those dark thoughts out his head. But they quickly returned. He was supposed to protect Sayuri, but he failed her, and he hurt her badly. He lay back on his bed, sighing. And that's when he heard a knock at the door. He quickly sat up. It must be that Shikamaru boy. He's been visiting him daily since the house arrests began. Kei got up tiredly, dragging his feet as he slowly made his way to the door. He opened the door carelessly. Sayuri? ! He stuttered in shock. Never in a million years did he think that he'd be seeing her on the other side of the threshold. She glanced at him before lowering her eyes to the ground. She couldn't even look at him. Can I come in? She asked slowly, averting eye contact. Kei's brows curled upwards slightly. Oh, of course, he said, stepping back and letting her in. As she hesitantly entered, he backed deeper into the room, giving her as much space as possible. Bobo ran in, and barked happily as he circled his blonde friend, causing a faint smile to come to the boy's lips. Sayuri stood next to the wall and stared in thought. The expression on her face causing the smile on Kei's face to disappear as he stood straight and leaned back. A heavy silence took over the room, with a dark over that made it hard to breathe. Finally Kei broke that silence, as he said guiltily. Sayuri. I was so afraid. Sayuri interrupted, her eyes turning towards the ground, her mind clearly absent in thought. You scared the hell out of me, Kei, she added, lifting her eyes to his face. Kei felt his chest get tight. He started, but was unable to finish. A faint smile was pasted on Sayuri's lips as she turned away again. I couldn't bear the thought of being around such a. The words escaped her for a moment. I cried a lot, you know. She then added slowly, her eyes wandering across the floor. Thinking it over and over, how horrible that night was, she added. Tears filled Kei's eyes. Why was she doing that to him? So cruel, his heart ached so much. But then I realized something, Sayuri added, slowly lifting her eyes. It's still you in there, she said. Be kind, soft Kei. My friend. My only friend in the world, she said. Her fate smile had disappeared, and tears filling her eyes. If I was afraid, then what about you? You discover something so frightening about yourself, something you had no control knowledge or of. And that's when you needed me the most, but I was being so selfish, she shouted, a tear trickling down her cheek. Kei hesitated to approach her, as she wiped away the tear. She then lifted her tear-filled eyes towards him, a saddened look on her face. I miss you so much, she suddenly shouted, throwing herself into his arms. Kei rubbed her back comfortingly, fighting back the tears in his eyes. I miss you too, he said softly. She sobbed for a few moments, before pushing herself back, and lifting her eyes to stare at his tanned face. I'm sorry, Kei, she said hesitantly. There's nothing to be sorry about. I understand, he said with a pale smile. At that moment Bobo barked loudly, bouncing around in the other corner of the room. The two teens cracked up laughing for no apparent reason. It's pretty boring around here without you, Kei said, backing away to sit on the bed. Heh. Bobo really missed you, Sayuri said with a smile. Kei laughed, as he pet the dog's head. A/N. Yes, so I don't remember most of what was in the original chapter, so this is a crappy version of it. The next chapter is going to much longer, and it will be the last. I'm hoping to get it done within the next few days, cause soon I won't have internet access for a while. Please still review, I'll get back to you much later. Chapter 10. A/N. H. Gomen. It took longer than I thought. Enjoy the last chapter. Lulling. W. A friend in demand. A.K. Choices. Sayuri stared at the vibrant patch of yellow flowers, not too far away from Kei's apartment. She sighed, backing away and closing the window, sitting back down on Kei's bed. The blonde stared at the clearly bored girl. Sayuri, go out. It's okay. Just because I'm on house arrest it doesn't mean you are too, he said, with an encouraging smile. She looked up at him. Nah. I'm okay. Don't really feel like going out, she said with a fake smile. Naruto stared at her guiltily, she won't admit it. But she's too afraid to go out alone. And it's his fault. Sayuri pretended not to notice the looks her friends was giving her. She jumped up to her feet playfully. I think I'm gonna have some milk, she said giddily, a very poor act. Kei stared at her for a moment, then out the window at the greenery. The poor girl isn't used to being stuck in a stuffy apartment. She's used to be free to walk around the beautiful forest surrounding her cabin. He has to do something about it. Come on, let's go, Kei said, standing up. Go? Go where? She looked at him surprised. Are you forgetting? You're on house arrest. House, she said. No, I didn't forget. We're sneaking out, he said, grabbing his silver windbreaker and slipping it on. Kei, she shouted in a whisper. Are you nuts? We'll get in trouble, she added. No, we won't, he said with a smile. We'll sneak out, walk around for 10 minutes without being seen, and then come home. No harm. Sayuri stared at him as if he were crazy. You're crazy, she said. Kei shrugged with a smile. It's your loss. I'm going out. If you're too afraid to come with me, then you can stay here, alone. He said that, then headed towards the bathroom. The brown-haired teen stared at his back for a moment, surprised as he walked away. Wait for me, she said, quickly snatching her peach sweater and hurrying after him. She found him stopped in front of the bathroom's one window. Now what? She asked cautiously, staring at the corner of Kei's face. The teen didn't answer at first, as he inspected the window, then looked out of it at the empty street below. We'll climb down the drain pipe here, then we can go through the back alleys until we reach the back of an old park, Kei said, pointing out the window. Sayuri's eyes widened fearfully, but didn't say anything as she stared at Kei's confident face. The boy stared out the window for a few more moments. Come on, he said, singling at Sayuri. Bobo barked. And not this time, buddy, you can't come with us, the blue-eyed boy said with a smile. Bobo grunted and barked again, as if he understood what the blonde was saying. Kei, I really don't think I can climb down, Sayuri said, shaking slightly. Kei thought it over for a moment. Then I'll carry you, he said simply, with a smile. Are you sure? Sayuri asked hesitantly. Kei nodded, then bent down slightly to let her climb on. Come on, get on, he said confidently as her hesitation lasted. Sayuri hesitated once more, then wrapped her arms around Kei's neck and leaned against his back. Kei waited for a second, then stood up. Hold on tight, okay? He said seriously. She didn't answer. Kei headed to the window. Ready? He asked, and felt her nod against his shoulder. He took a deep breath before steadying himself on the edge of the window. Cautiously he slipped out onto the outer ledge, breathing deeply as he wrapped his hands tightly around the water pipe. Sayuri tightened her grip on Kei, squeezing tightly with her legs on his sides as he stepped off the edge and began down the metal pipe. Slowly Kei descended down, very cautiously making his way towards the ground. However, the longer he and Sayuri stayed up there, holding both their weights on his arms, the harder it became. The brown-haired teen could feel her heart pound so hard she guessed that Kei could feel it thumping against his back. As they neared the ground, Kei got more and more confident, but the pain in his arm not letting him forget that he still isn't out of the danger. Finally, Kei's feet settled on the ground. He gently let the girl off his back. As he flexed his muscles, Sayuri lifted her eyes to stare at the apartment window 3 stories up. Kei's blue eyes soon did the same. "Kei, we forgot about something," she said seriously, not turning to make eye contact as she spoke. "Ah," he answered, doing the same. "How are we going to get back up there?" she asked as if he hadn't answered her in the first place. A smile formed on Kei's lips. "Well, there's no use in just standing round here," he said. "Let's go," he added, taking the girl by the hand. The two made their way through the empty back alleys. It wasn't long until they reached a rather distant patch of greenery. Once in this small forest-like area, Sayuri let go of the blonde's hand, smiling widely as she preceded him deeper into the lively area. Kei watched calmly as Sayuri skipped deeper and deeper into the area. Clearly it was an abandoned place. After about 10 minutes of wandering around, Kei decided it was about time to start heading back. "Sayuri, come on. I think we should go now," he called out. Sayuri turned around, pouting. Not yet," she said. "I'm having too much fun." Kei smiled and was about to reply, when he suddenly stopped. "Sayuri, did you hear that?" he asked nervously. She turned around and stared at him questioningly. "Hear what?" she asked, listening closely. Kei turned around, searching in all directions nervously. "I don't know. I heard something," he said, his brows knotted tightly. Sayuri shrugged. "I don't hear anything," she said simply. But just as she finished her sentence, they heard the sound again. This time it's clear. Both teens turned towards the bushes. "Kei?" Sayuri said, frightened, as she inched her way towards him. Before the blonde could reassure her, a figure jumped out of the bushes. The two gasped, stumbling backwards. "Naruto?" The figure, who was Shikamaru, said, genuinely surprised. Before the blonde could respond, the black-haired boy pushed the two to the ground, shielding them with his arms. Naruto tried to lift his head, but Shikamaru held him down. "Hey, what the?" he began to shout, but was interrupted by a loud explosion relatively close by. Sayuri's loud scream was overpowered by the explosion as she cowered further towards her blue-eyed friend. Suddenly Sakura jumped out of the bushes and smoke surrounding them. Without noticing the teens below her, she sprinted across the area. Hot on her trail was a masked ninja in foreign dress. The two females quickly cleared the area and disappeared into the bushes. Shikamaru instantly jumped to his feet, and then quickly helped the two teens up. "Naruto, take your friend here and go home," he ordered. "But the blonde protested. The dark-haired boy interrupted with a signal of his hand. "Now," he added sternly. The two stared at each other for a few moments before the Chunin turned away, and hurried in the direction the two other ninjas disappeared to. "Keikun?" Sayuri called, turning to her pal frightenedly. The blonde remained silent for a few short moments, before rubbing the girl's cheek with the palm of his hand. "Everything will be all right," he said warmly. "Keikun?" she repeated. "Come on, let's leave," she added, shaking. Kei remained silent for some time. "You stay here. I have to help them," he said, ushering her towards a tree with a large hole in it. "No," she gasped, grasping onto his arm tightly. "It's too dangerous." "You're not a ninja anymore," she said, tears filling her eyes. "Please. Let's just go," she begged. "You'll be safer, okay?" he said warmly. "Don't worry. Everything will be all right," he reassured her. Sayuri couldn't help but obey his calm, confident words, as he helped her into a tree log, then covered it with leaves and twigs. Kei stepped back, taking a good look at where he had hid Sayuri, and making sure it was well covered, before taking off in the direction Shikamaru had went. He ran aimlessly through the thick terrain of plants and bushes, pushing past their large leaves and maneuvering around the logs and trees. He had no way to know whether or not the ninjas had continued on a straight path or swerved into another section of the area. He chose to follow his gut feeling and go forward in the same direction. After a while he could see that the ring of greenery had gotten thinner, and that there was a clearing just past a group of large leaf plants. He heard commotion on the other side. Kay hesitated for a few moments, then walked into the clearing. He quickly glanced around the abandoned area, and noticed a rundown building at the back. The design of it looked to him like an old school. However, he only wasted so little time on the minor details, then focused on the ninja battle that was going on between the two Konoha ninjas, and the mysterious masked ninja. He saw the ninja avoid a punch Sakura threw at her, then flipped back twice to evade 3 kunais that headed her way. She then turned around quickly and ran straight up. He wall? At the same time he saw Shikamaru's shadow chase after her. Suddenly it stopped, and it seemed that it could no longer continue. The masked ninja then launched herself off the wall, landing on the roof of the rundown school. She performed a series of hand seals. "Suetun, do it Yuden!" she shouted. Water element, water dragon missile. In front of Kay's shocked eyes rose a large dragon-like water creature out of an old water tank. It raised high into the sky for a second, then came smashing down, trying to hit the intelligent shinobi. Shikamaru darted right and left, barely escaping the water dragon, which would clearly land a hit shortly. It was then that Kay noticed Sakura running up the wall, then jumping towards the foe ninja, her right fist bearing a punch. "You forgot about me!" the pink-haired kunoichi yelled, as her punch hit the woman in the cheek. The woman flew to the right, then fell to the ground, skidding shortly before a painful stop. However, she quickly recovered, jumping to her feet and launching towards Sakura in total rage. The medic found herself in a taijutsu match with the angered enemy. She dodged kicks and punches, as she struggled to defend herself, let alone attack. Kay felt useless. The urge to defend his friends grew more and more inside of him. But how? He's weak now. "Sakura-chan!" he shouted thoughtlessly, seeing her getting defeated. Her ears caught the distant voice. She turned her head slightly to his direction. "Naruto?" she muttered, surprised. But that second that she got distracted in was more than enough for the other female to take advantage of. She pulled her fist back, then launched into Sakura's face. "Pay back time, bitch!" she yelled contently. She then whipped around and kicked Sakura in the chest. The female Chunin gasped in pain as she was sent flying back, then let out a pained screech as she landed roughly and tumbled a couple times before her body settled in the dirt. Shikamaru quickly rushed towards her, but the foe ninja instantly appeared in his path. The dark-haired boy halted quickly, reassessing his situation. He's at a clear disadvantage. The woman seemed to be well-rounded with her taijutsu skills, where he lacks the most. He struggled to come up with a plan of action quickly, carefully minding to keep the battle as far away from his now civilian friend. He pulled out 3 kunais and threw them at the ninja. However, she simply dispelled them with her own kunai. As those were flicked away in different directions, she threw her kunai towards Shikamaru. Kay gasped, stumbling back as one of the aimless kunais embedded itself between his feet. Shikamaru noticed that from the corner of his eye, but could do nothing as he jumped out of the way of the long kunai that was sent his way. He then turned his eyes towards foe ninja who had jumped into the air. A gleam appeared in her eyes as she pulled her hands out of her pouch. She held 6 kunais between her fingers. Before the dark-haired boy could make a move, she threw the 3 kunais from her right hand, then twirled around in midair, releasing the other 3 from her left. The 6 kunais stuck into the ground on either side of Shikamaru. The inelegant shinobi moved his eyes cautiously from his enemy, who seemed to be smirking, to the closest kunai to him. It took him a moment before he heard the low hissing sound. "Naruto! Get down!" he shouted to his dazed friend, as he jumped back as fast as he could, shielding himself with his arms. The blonde instantly dropped back to the ground, just as 6 simultaneous explosions went off near Shikamaru. Naruto's ears were ringing as he slowly lifted his head, wiping the dirt off of his face. He stared worriedly at the large cloud of smoke that was slowly dispersing. Suddenly Shikamaru burst out of the cloud of smoke, his arms and torso covered in various singes and burns. Straight after him popped out the female ninja. She did a vertical flip in the air, kicking Shikamaru in the chest, and sending him plummeting to the ground. As the young ninja hit the ground, the foe ninja landed on top of him, bearing an evil-looking kunai in her hands. The masked ninja sat on Shikamaru's torso, letting out mad and vicious laughs as she pushed the kunai towards the boy's neck. the later grabbing tightly onto the woman's forearms, fighting desperately to push them away. Shikamaru's brows knotted so much they nearly merged, as the kunai got closer and closer. And he felt unable to stop it. Suddenly, he saw from the corner of his eye a shadow jump out of the tree and bushes, reaching its highest point right in front of the high sun. Shikamaru squinted, and the foe ninja turned quickly, both straining to see who this shadow was. "Konoha Gariki Senpai!" Konoha's strong whirlwind shouted a stern voice. The foe's eyes widened as she saw a bull-haired ninja come down towards her with a powerful kick. She tried to jump away, but Shikamaru held tightly onto her wrist, preventing her from escaping. The female ninja gasped hard as Lee's kick hit her in the shoulder, then sent her flying over Shikamaru, and then hitting the ground roughly a fair distance away. The bushy-browed warrior helped his dark-haired friend up. "You all right?" he asked seriously. Shikamaru replied briefly. Lee was about to say something, when he remembered his pink-haired friend. He rushed over to Sakura's side, kneeling next to her. "Sakura-chan, are you all right?" he asked worriedly, unknowingly repeating her same mistake of taking your focus off the enemy. Sakura smiled lightly, and opened her mouth to say something reassuring, however her eyes suddenly widened. "Lee, behind you!" she shouted. The Konoha ninja whipped around at his high speed. He saw two kunais flying towards him. He wasn't able to move, not because he wasn't fast enough, but because Sakura's right behind him. She's injured, and won't be able to move away fast enough. So instead, he crossed his arms shielding his body. The dark-haired boy winced in pain as one kunai sunk into his forearm, the other into his shoulder. "Lee!" Sakura gasped. The boy turned his head in her direction slightly, keeping one eye closed as he tried to contain his pain. "Don't worry, Sakura-chan. I'll be okay," he said with a pale smile. However, just at that moment, he received a strong kick to the head that sent him flying over the medic and hitting the ground a few feet away. The whole situation was like a dream. No. A nightmare. One that he couldn't wake from. Kei watched helplessly as the foe ninja lifted her kunai to stab a partially paralyzed Sakura with it. However, she suddenly fell forward. "Why is that?" "Oh. It was Shikamaru who hit her." Sakura is struggling to heal herself, however the green light around her hand is pale and weak. It pulsed a few times as she tried to get up. Meanwhile, the masked ninja was fighting Lee. He landed a couple of hits, but then failed at getting any more. Shikamaru jumped over to Lee wanting to help him up. However, he suddenly falls over on top of Lee. How come? Oh, the ninja hit him. This is horrible. Sayuri walked cautiously through the thick bushes. Kei told her to stay put. However, she can't bear the thought of letting him be in danger all alone. Maybe she'd be able to help in any way. She could see a less restricted light behind some large-leaved plants, and could hear sounds of fighting. At that she stopped, fear finding its way back into her heart, and pushing back the determination that brought her this far already. Kei felt so guilty. His friends were struggling so much to protect each other, but he couldn't do anything. He's too weak. His brows curled and he felt a lump in his throat. Why? Why can't he help them? Sayuri watched as the fighting went on. She could see Kei standing to the side. She hesitated to go any further. She was scared. The blonde tightened his grip as he watched his friends being beaten up, but at the same time he didn't want to get any closer. He didn't want to be a burden on him. Although he already was, he turned sad eyes to see the injured Sakura. He had distracted her. Had he not been here, she wouldn't have gotten hurt. Or if he was any stronger, then maybe he could have helped her, and all the rest of them. He wants to help, he needs to help them. But how? What is he supposed to do? He's a civilian now, a good-for-nothing person that can only weigh them down. They're paying the price for his weakness. If only Naruto was there. The stronger person that would have helped his friends when they needed him. Why isn't he there? Is he so afraid of his lonely life that he decided to turn away from it forever? But his friends need Naruto now. No matter how much it might hurt to come back to the sad, pathetic life he lived, they still need him. Suddenly Kei felt extremely lightheaded. He staggered a few steps and barely kept on his feet. All the sounds were hollow. Every image was distant and dark. No clear thoughts. No clear feelings. Who am I? He heard his voice say in echo. My name. Kei? He closed his eyes and tried harder to focus. No. That's no my name. He shook his head roughly. I'm Naruto. Suddenly he felt as if he got a blow to all of his body. His eyes shot open, and a gasp couldn't reach his lips. Hundreds of thoughts and memories raced through his brain, as if ice-cold water that seeped into the rest of his body. At that he realized that there was a blurry figure holding onto his shoulders and shaking him roughly, a distant voice calling in incomprehensible words. Suddenly he regained the ability to hear and see. It was Shikamaru. "Naruto! Naruto, what's wrong?" he shouted as he shook the previously dazed boy. The blonde stared at his friend's face for a short moment, his expression then changed. "Shikamaru?" he said, unsure whether he was surprised or not. The intelligent shinobi froze for a moment. "Naruto?" he questioned, as if he had been talking to someone else a few seconds ago. Naruto smiled. "Ah," he said confidently. Shikamaru stared at him. Everything about him had changed, his manner of speech, his posture. The blonde quickly turned his attention off his pineapple-headed friend, surveying the area with his stern eyes. They locked on the pinkett, who was busy healing her broken ribs. His brows knotted tightly. "Sakura-chan," he muttered to himself. He quickly left Shikamaru's side, sprinting over to his medic teammate. He stood over her for a second, then kneeled down, placing his palm on the girl's shoulder. "Sakura, are you okay?" he asked with concern. The kunoichi's eyes widened. "Naruto?" Sakura questioned, in the same manner Shikamaru had previously used. Naruto smiled in her face, then stood up with determination. "Anyone who hurts Sakura-chan, I will not forgive," he said sternly, turning towards where Lee was battling the foe ninja. Sakura was speechless, as she stared up her blue-eyed friend, who now looked like a giant to her. Naruto suddenly tensed as he saw the masked ninja jump onto a high perch and perform a series of hand seals, stopping on the tiger hand seal. "Doton Chikyo Kairo," she said in a deep voice. "Earth element, earth fall." At first nothing happened, but then the Konoha ninja felt the ground rumble under their feet. In a few seconds, chunks of that same earth broke off, raising high into the sky. Immediately Naruto formed a clone, which quickly picked up his pink-haired friend. Just as the clone jumped in another direction from the original, the pieces of stone and dirt began raining down, smashing back onto the ground, and only nearly missing the ninjas below. The foreign ninja let out mocking chuckles as she watched the teenagers struggle to keep away from her falling rocks. She smirked contentedly, focusing on making the fall of rocks stronger and heavier so that they'd have no escape. Suddenly she noticed someone approaching from the left. She whipped around, her hands parting and her concentration lost, thus disabling her technique, and causing all the rocks that were hanging in the sky to fall all at once. The woman found herself facing the blonde Konoha ninja. "Take this!" he yelled, throwing a punch at her. She let out a laugh as she jumped back and the punch missed its aim. She landed on the roof of the old school once more, Naruto quickly following her. He growled, whipping around and trying to kick her. She evaded him with great ease, and another mocking chuckle. She laughed and laughed as if participating in the most amusing game as he tried time and time again to land a hit. "Shut the hell up, damn it!" Naruto screamed, putting all his rage into a powerful punch. This time the female did not jump or dodge, instead she caught his fist in the palm of her hand. An evil gleam appeared in her eyes as she tightened her grip on his and smirked. Naruto nearly lost balance as he stopped abruptly. He then quickly began trying to pull his hand out of her grip. However, her iron hold only got tighter. She then let out a loud chuckle, pulling his fist towards her. Naruto gasped as he suddenly fell towards her, only to receive a punch in the face. He began to fly back, however she quickly pulled him back, this time her hand launching towards his neck. The blonde let out a shocked gasp as the woman held him tightly by the neck with one arm. He kicked helplessly as she slowly lifted him off the ground, letting out amused laughs. The blonde dug his fingers into her arm, a chocked gasp barely making it past his lips. "Naruto!" he heard his friend's voice call. Lee jumped in the air, aiming a strong kick towards the foe ninja. However, the latter had a very easy and effective manner to stop him. She merely flung the blonde she held in her right towards the attacking ninja. The black-haired boy suddenly stopped his attack as he saw his blue-eyed friend flying towards him. Naruto slammed into Lee, pushing the two of them a few meters back, then plummeting towards the ground. Lee flipped in mid-air, landing firmly on the ground, while on the other hand Naruto fell face first into the dirt. Naruto groaned, slowly getting up and wiping his face. Lee stood ready, staring up at their enemy. "Welcome back, comrade," he said seriously without turning towards said person. Naruto merely nodded, staring at the woman who laughed mockingly from above. Do you really think that a bunch of kids are going to defeat me? She yelled, followed by a belittling laugh. Heh. We sure are, a female voice answered from behind her. The ninja whipped around surprised, wondering how the girl had recovered from her previous injuries. Sakura smirked confidently, adjusting her glove for a short second before lunging at the woman. Take this! Sha! She shouted, throwing her fist. Her punch hit the woman square in the face. She was sent flying off the edge of the small building, then fell a few feet away from where Naruto and Lee stood. The two teens exchanged a brief look, then turned back towards their enemy. The masked ninja let out a short grunt as the boys approached. She then quickly jumped to her feet, kicking low and knocking Naruto's feet from underneath him. She then leaned back, aiming another kick towards Lee. However, the Chunin jumped back, then back forward, this time twirling around and kicking the woman in the gut. She let out a short screech, flying back and falling into the bushes. The teens looked at each other's faces, then smiled in relief. They then slowly walked together towards where the woman had fallen. Suddenly the bushes moved as someone made their way back through. The Konoha ninjas tensed, then their brows knotted tightly as the person stepped out into the clearing. The woman came out, and in her arms she held Sayuri, with a kunai to the girl's throat. Her mask and attire was torn in many places, revealing her smirk and various injuries. She slowly walked towards the small group, pushing Sayuri in front of her. Sayuri-chan? Naruto gasped. KK. Sayuri shrieked with tears in her eyes, extended her hands slightly towards Naruto. The blonde formed a tight fist. Don't you dare harm her! Naruto shouted angrily. Or else what? The ninja interrupted with a spiteful grin. Stop making empty threats, boy! She added mockingly, pushing the kunai more against Sayuri's flesh. The teen's expressions grew darker. It's shameful to take a young girl hostage like that! Lee yelled dramatically, pointing at the woman. She stared at him weirdly for a moment, before her expression changed to belittling. While both Sakura and Naruto sighed defeatedly, staring at their idealistic bull-headed friend, barely restraining themselves from slapping him upside the head. Enough of this nonsense! The unmasked ninja growled. Now stand together where I can see you. Including. She suddenly cut her sentence short. Where's that pineapple-headed boy? She muttered, looking around cautiously. Suddenly she gasped, as her body froze on its own. Her eyes stopped at the furthest corner of her eye, as she strained to turn around as a mocking voice spoke from behind her. Looking for me? Shikamaru? Naruto shouted happily. The dark-haired boy smiled at him for a second, before turning his eyes back to his enemy's back. He opened his hand, the woman unwillingly mimicking his action and dropping the kunai to the ground. He then slowly parted his arms, the woman resisting viciously, but in the end doing the same. The brown-haired girl gasped, falling to her knees, then quickly stumbling towards Kei's warm embrace. She cowered in his arms, burying her face in his chest and whimpering slightly. Naruto rubbed her back comfortingly. It's okay. You're okay now, Sayuri-chan, he said softly. The teen lifted tear-filled eyes staring at his tanned face for some time, before the blonde gently pushed her to the side, letting her lean onto Lee, who was standing next to him. Naruto then lifted stern eyes towards the female ninja. She winced. What are you going to do? She shouted shakily, struggling in vain to get her body to submit to her will. The blonde said nothing, instead he smirked confidently, forming a clone. Without breaking the eye contact, he lifted his hand from his side in front of his clone. The faux ninja stared cautiously as the clone performed a circular motion in the blonde boy's hand. Slowly a blue orb of energy formed, causing uneasiness in the atmosphere of wind and energy. A gleam appeared in Naruto's eyes as he pulled back his arm. Rasengan! He shouted, lunging towards the woman. Aye! She screamed, trying her hardest to jump away. Just at the last second, Shikamaru let go of her, jumping to the side. She let out a loud scream as she flew over his head, then slammed roughly against a tree trunk. Sayuri smiled widely, pushing Lee aside and rushing over to congratulate her friend. I told you that I wouldn't forgive you, he muttered to himself, staring sternly at where the ninja had fallen. Sayuri froze in her steps. It was for her, his pink-haired friend. He did all of that. For her and her only. She felt her heart sink. She saw how hard he fought. For them, his friends. The brown-haired girl then resumed her walk, at a slower pace. I see you got your memory back, she said in a low voice, with a soft smile. Naruto whipped around, staring at Sayuri with concern. He answered hesitantly, feeling at unease. Heh. Congratulations, she added, tilting her head slightly. Oh, he repeated, not knowing what else to say, forcing a slight smile to his lips. They became very silent after that. And Naruto? They heard Sakura's hesitant voice call. The two teens turned around to face her. She exchanged a brief look with Lee. Did you really get your memories back? She asked, worry and anticipation on her features. Naruto felt like himself again, as he smiled widely. He answered confidently. His comrades' faces lightened. Yokata, Sakura said happily, relief finally coming to her face. Yada ! Lee shouted, jumping up. Yokata/Yada, I believe they mean something like thank goodness. They used to express relief in the animes, so. After a few minutes, Sakura turned to her blonde friend. Naruto, why did you break your house arrest? You could have got seriously hurt, she scolded. Sakura-chan. Naruto was cooped up in there with his friend for too long. He had to get to express and enjoy his youth. Lo explained. Naruto closed his eyes and crossed his arms. So, he said seriously, nodding his head. Means something like that's right. Sakura smacked him upside the head. That's enough, Baka Yaro. Idiot, she shouted at him. Shikamaru then popped out of the bushes. Do you think we should take this with us? He smirked, carrying the unconscious enemy on his shoulder. The teens laughed delightedly. All but one. Sayuri. Naruto spent the next day in the hospital, for checkups, and to treat some smaller wounds. It wasn't long until his room was filled with his delighted friends. Those who didn't have any missions, that is. They all seemed so relieved, even Tsunade. Although she pretended otherwise, and made it sting a little extra when she healed him. Obisama? Naruto said, rolling his sleeve back down. The blonde woman twitched, she furrowed her brows. Nani? She asked, barely suppressing her anger. Who was that ninja that we were fighting? He asked, not noticing her obvious anger. Tsunade took a deep breath, clearing her throat. Well, without getting into any details that don't concern you. She was a wanted criminal. It was Sakura, and Shikamaru's B-ranked mission. That was accidentally brought deeper into Konoha. She said, started walking away. Now I have work to do. I have to explain all this to the council, she said before leaving. Naruto? Tenten said. He hummed, turning to her with a smile. Do you remember? Not having a memory, that is? She questioned. All the teens stared. Well. Naruto muttered, scratching the back of his head. I do. He suddenly added seriously. But it's weird. It's as if I have someone else's memories now, like I was gone for a while, and now I came back, and I remember all these things that someone that wasn't me did, but it was still me. I see. Tenten hummed, not really understanding. She then looked up at the wall clock. Okay then, see you later, I'm late for my training. Kiba automatically mimicked her, looking at the clock, his face suddenly dropped. What? ! I'm so late! I'm so going to die. He shouted. Nah. See you later, Naruto. He shouted, beating Tenten to the door. Soon after, more and more of his friends left. Come evening, there was no one there. Naruto sat in his room that reflected the orange glow of the evening sun. Tui and Bius guarding his door until he got back to his house, to resume his house arrest. He leaned his head back against the metal rail of the bed. In thought he closed his eyes. Tomorrow noon he'd be going back to his apartment. Sayuri has to spend the night alone. He opened his eyes, realizing that Sayuri wasn't around for the longest time. She sought him out at the beginning of the day, but she must have slipped away when his friends came. He furrowed his brows. He should have noticed when she left. But he didn't. Naruto didn't feel comfortable walking to his apartment, escorted by guards as if he were some sort of dangerous criminal. He pushed those thoughts aside, as he opened the apartment door, wondering if Sayuri was there. Tadaima. I am back, he whispered, walking into the darkened room. Sayuri stood up from bed, smiling palely. Okay. Naruto, she said lowly. Naruto heard the door being closed behind him, But he didn't care as he stared confusedly at Sayuri's bags that were set neatly near the door. He turned towards the girl. Sayuri. You're... he stuttered. Sayuri turned away for a moment, then returned her eyes to the boy's confused face. WWH, why is your stuff packed? He asked, stepping deeper into the room. The brown-haired girl flinched. I'm going back to the Hyrule Forest, she said sternly, after a moment of hesitation. What? Why? Naruto shouted. Sayuri flinched again, then lowered her face to the ground. K. She muttered. Why do you have to go back there? You'll be all alone. He interrupted. Stay here, with me. He added. I can't. She answered hesitantly. Why not? He pressed. The apartment is big enough. We can both live here. And then what? Sayuri suddenly shouted, with tears in her eyes. You're a ninja now. So what am I supposed to do? Live here? Alone. While you go on missions. And do ninja stuff. Naruto didn't know how to answer. She was right, their lives weren't compatible anymore. He can't ask her to stay here just for him. She doesn't have anything that ties her here. She'd be lonely. In a place that isn't her home. But if she goes back, she'll also be all alone. Naruto. It's alright. She suddenly said, a soft smile on her lips. I'll be okay. I'm a strong girl. She added, tilting her head. But Sayuri. He started, taking a step in her direction. You know why I stopped calling you an Isen brother when we came here? The teen started, her eyes lost in a memory, and warm smile on her face. Because that's not how I loved you anymore. She lifted her eyes, to stare at him in the eye. It was different. Naruto stared at her silently, so she stepped forward. Don't worry about me. I'll be okay there. She said with a smile, hugging him. The blonde froze for a moment. Then I'll go with you. He said. Sayuri instantly pushed him in the chest slightly, her smile disappearing, and her soon-to-be crying expression returned. No. Naruto. No. It's hard enough like this. Don't make it any worse. She said, stepping back. She quickly wiped away a tear that escaped her eye. Sayuri. Naruto said, extending a hand towards her. Daijabu. I am fine, she quickly said, drawing a smile on her lips. We've changed, Naruto. We can both sense it. I'm sure you're a very nice person. But you're not the same person I came here with, and would do anything for. You're Naruto. Not Kei. She looked him in the eye and seemed more collected. Kei's gone. And never coming back. She added to herself. Naruto stared at her with his brows curled upward. She giggled. It's okay, Naruto, you can smile. She said, grinning. It's not like I'm disappearing from existence. You can come see me at any time. Okay? Oh. Naruto hummed. Heavy silence came over them for a few moments. And my escort should be here any moment. Sayuri said hesitantly, looking around the room. He hummed, staring at her sadly. She noticed his stares and blushed. Sayuri. He said. At that moment he was interrupted by a knock at the door. Both teens flinched. Sayuri-san. I'm here to take you to Hyrule Forest. A voice called from the other side. Hi. One moment please. She answered. Let me help you with your bags. Naruto said, about to walk over to her. I got it. She quickly said, picking them up. Naruto froze in his spot, not knowing what to do. The girl stood still for a moment. She then walked over to him, and stopped in front of him, staring him in the eye. She then leaned towards him, softly pressing her lips against his. The surprised boy didn't move, even as she pulled back. Goodbye. Kei. She whispered. Even then Naruto remained still, staring at her face. She looked away, picking up her bags, and signaling for her dog to follow her. The dog stared at the blonde for a moment, then let out a bark as he hurried after his master. Who opened the door? The ninja glanced at Naruto, who turned to look at Sayuri's back. Are you ready, Sayuri-san? The ninja said politely. She answered seriously. The ninja nodded, then walked past the guards and down the stairs. Sayuri was about to leave. She suddenly stopped and turned to half-face the blonde. She stared at him silently for a moment. Arigato. Naruto. For everything. She said calmly, with a warm smile. She then slowly closed the door behind her, then hurried down the stairs. Naruto stared at the closed door as he listened to her foot. steps as they left, not knowing the reason that she was hurrying was so he wouldn't see her tears. He remained still for a while, then turned his eyes to the floor. He was alone. Again. Epilogue. Naruto sat on his bed. Sayuri had left hours ago, and he didn't do much since. He stared absent-mindedly at the wall. The room was so much lonelier than her remembered. He looked around, each corner of the room held a memory with Sayuri. It was as if she was no more than that, a memory. A memory of a pleasant dream that he woke from, leaving a small good feeling that would soon fade away. He touched his lips with the tips of his fingers, he could still feel the dried kiss there. But even that soft kiss was never meant for him. He sighed. The room was cold and dark. Not because the sun was nearly setting, but because the happiness had left it. When Sayuri did, Naruto stared at the ceiling, a bitter smirk on his lips. A dark, cold, and empty room. A perfect summary for a Jinchuriki's life. End. September 8th, 2010 December 4th, 2011. /N. Yup, I love sad endings. Sorry! It's not quite as pulled together as I would have hoped, but this is a rewrite. So it was confusing. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a review. This was the longest story I had ever written at the time. Now I have one that's much longer. I'm going to take a break before I start posting that one. It's already finished though. Ugh. Oh, and the date above is what it originally took me to finish it. It seems like a lot. But I had writer's block for the better part of that period. /N2. I'm going to start working on a drawing of Sayuri and Kei soon, so check for the link on my profile page in a week or so from now. Also working on a bonus story, cause I like Sayuri. Probably be finished around the same time.